Good morning, folks, and welcome to our continuing coverage of the You Decide 2006 election. The balance of power in the House of Representatives has shifted to the Democrats. They take control of the House after being out of power for 12 years. Things are still up for grabs in the Senate, though. The Democrats have gained 4 seats, but it will all come down to 2 key races.
We all go out, we vote, we argue, we vote. But also, we'd like to say that the votes are in and we won.
Not so fast, Jim Webb. One of those races is in Virginia. It has not been decided yet, but Democrat Jim Webb is already declaring victory. Did that at 1 o'clock this morning. The difference is so close that we could see a recount. We're also watching for the Senate race in Montana to be called, plus election results from coast to coast on this special edition of Fox and Friends for the day after.
Welcome, everyone. 7 o'clock on the East Coast on, Steve, as you said, the day after the election with the results coming in now. All but 2 races in the Senate, and there may be a handful of races as well in the House, but it's not going to change the fact that Democrats have taken over control of the House.
Yeah, and it looks like the number one issue and probably the number one reason why the Democrats are in control of the House and possibly the Senate, and they're really co-champs. It is corruption and Iraq. Those are the 2 issues that disturb voters the most. The other thing that hurt the Republicans, the turnout. Not nearly as good as some had postulated before and surmised, because they did a recent study the Monday before the election, 2 days ago, and it said 68% were promising. They said they are certain they were going to vote. How many actually voted? Under 50. It's embarrassing.
It's just, it goes to show you when you look at those polls ahead of an election, how reliable are they? Well, in this case, not very. So some of the things we're going to be talking about, we're going to be talking to Bill Kristol about how President Bush will deal with a Democratic House with the majority for the next 2 years. Also, Karen Finney, the DNC Communications Director, will be dropping by, and RNC Chair Ken Mehlman. He was here a couple of days ago. He was optimistic. Let's see how he's feeling today, the day after. Now, keep in mind, the Dems now hold the House, but the balance of power in the Senate comes down to 2 seats. If the Republicans win one of the 2 seats, either the great state of Montana or the Commonwealth of Virginia, the Republicans will control the Senate. However, if they lose 2, it goes into the blue column.
And one of the Democrats who is going to get a lot of the credit for having this big win is Rahm Emanuel, a representative from Illinois. Even Republicans said that his campaign strategies this time around were, quote, masterful, some people calling him the Democratic rock star. Let's listen to what he told me just an hour ago.
I really do believe, fundamentally, we had a great victory last night. I meant what I said, though, is that the work of reform begins today.
So let's talk about what this is going to mean right now. It looks like the soon-to-be Speaker Pelosi, it's all but inevitable,
likely,
will be getting a call from the president today. At what point will they say, hey, I saw you on 60 Minutes. I love the way you called me incompetent and a boob. I mean, is that going to come up? Are we going to put that behind us? Do you think, how long until the rancor starts?
Well, you know what? That's an excellent question, because remember, she said that she'd like to pass a whole bunch of stuff in the first 100 hours. So the clock is ticking. And she's also said, she and Harry Reid and also Rahm Emanuel have all said it's time to have a spirit of bipartisanship in our nation's capital. The big question is, Nancy Pelosi is a very liberal Democrat from San Francisco. And if she's going to be an effective leader, she cannot be a real left-leaner. She's going to have to be more moderate, just as many of the Democrats who, the so-called blue dog Democrats who were elected yesterday. Now, out there in... Now, that number is wrong. Nancy Pelosi actually won with about 80%.
80%. That was up first. But was that actually John Murtha's number? No.
Yeah, and John Murtha...
who looks nothing like Nancy Pelosi.
You can hope.
Right.
Absolutely does not. He won with 61% of the vote, and it looks as if now he is poised to get the chairmanship of the House Appropriations Committee. In other words, he is, after being such a vocal critic of the policy in Iraq, he's pretty much going to be handling the purse. And it will be interesting to see what, if any, changes now that the Democrats, who have been very effective at complaining, now that they've got the high ground, What changes, if any, will they make?
Also, you mentioned Nancy Pelosi wanting to make changes within the first 100 hours. That's likely to be boosting minimum wage. How about fiscal discipline? Remove all doubt, pay as you go. Research on new embryonic stem cells. Scrap the ban on federal funding. Problematic prescription drug coverage for seniors. She says we can do something about that. You know, it's interesting. She says she wants to be a centrist. One has to wonder, is that because she wants to be nice to Republicans, or because, as Steve alluded to, there are so many Democrats who were elected last night who are moderates?
Yeah.
And this will have to be a situation where she maybe will have to reel in some of her very liberal points of view in order to have the people of her own party in step with her.
Well, a lot of people might not even have met Nancy Pelosi. They were running for different seats in the House. Now they will, and they'll have to understand that that'll be their leader. Now, here's the interesting thing, the way it plays into the war on terror in Iraq. You have someone in charge of the purse strings who decides when to spend money, a former Marine in Jack Murtha, who says, let's redeploy to Okinawa. Let's get out of Iraq. So if the administration doesn't budge on this, does he say, that's it, I am not giving you any money unless you do what I say? Let's just become a stare down. The House that shut down the government when Newt Gingrich was the Speaker.
Sure. But remember, the Democrats now control the House with just about 10, 11, 12 seats, something like that. That's not a huge majority. It's going to be very difficult for the Democrats to get anything done in this environment with just a 10 or 11 or 12 seat majority. Just look at how much trouble the Republicans had when they had about a little more than a dozen. Also, as you get up this morning and you say, what happened? Where were the Republicans? The answer is a lot of them stayed home. Turnout nationwide was at about 40%, which is about on par for a midterm election. And when you look at the exit polling information, which we all have here at all the TV networks, the number one thing people were steamed about, just the way things have been going with the conflict in Iraq.
It'd be interesting to ask Bill Kristol when he comes on the show about a lot of things, but about the turnout, because a lot of the experts leading up to this election were saying, yes, people are so angry that there's going to be this huge turnout, and in some states there were, specifically on their own state issues. But overall, as Steve has been telling us, you know, 40%, I think maybe a lot of people are surprised at the fact that more people did not come out. Was this truly only a base election? I'm interested in getting Bill Kristol's thoughts on that.
And you know, one other thing about that, of the 40%, more of the voters were Democrat than Republican, which means the vaunted get out the vote machine, which Karl Rove has been talking about, part of his three-point plan, apparently the get out the vote did not work so well yesterday.
Yeah, you can only get that automated voting, that automated calling machine going so many times. What does it mean for 08? What about the presidential aspirations for Senator John McCain? What about for Senator Hillary Clinton? Senator Hillary Clinton almost got 70% of the vote. They said they needed that to be a springboard towards the nomination. She got 68% of the vote. They said that John McCain, believe it or not, was a winner from this. He campaigned for 131 different congressional would-be leaders. Even though some of them lost, a lot of them feel as though they owe him, and he's really laid the groundwork. And we also know he's got the people on the ground already, and a lot of them are former Bush people, to really start off. There's no question about it. He wants to run. He was on our network twice before I went to bed.
That's right. In the meantime, it is a new day in Washington, D.C. The Dems in control of the House. Steve Centani has been up all day and part of yesterday, and he's going to tell us about the new day.
And I'm still here, and it is a new day over in the House, which you see right behind me, a decisive win for Democrats in the House. They only needed 15 seats to regain control, and they won at least 26. Now, that means California Congresswoman Nancy Pelosi is almost sure to become the first woman to serve as Speaker of the House. Last night, she hailed the Democrats' big win as a vote for a change of direction, especially in Iraq, where she says the president's policy is a catastrophic path. She says stay the course has not made America safer, but in spite of this big divide that remains between Republicans and Democrats, Pelosi promises a bipartisan approach to House leadership.
We are prepared to govern, and we will do so working together with the administration and the Republicans in Congress in partnership, not in partisanship.
Now, Pelosi has said her first priorities will be to raise the minimum wage, provide a better prescription drug program for seniors, and scrap the federal ban on stem cell research. Republicans expected the House to change hands, and they're fairly quiet in the aftermath of the election. But one House Republican leader, John Boehner, is looking to the future. He issued a statement last night saying, if Republicans stand together and unite behind solutions and ideas that move us closer to our common vision of a freer, more prosperous America, I'm confident the American people will return us to the majority in 2 years. Now, the president's expected to give Nancy Pelosi a call this morning to set the tone for what's bound to be a very different relationship between the White House and Capitol Hill. Back to you guys.
Steve Santani, we thank you very much.
You wonder if the leadership's going to stay in power for the Republican side now that they're the opposition party.
Probably not, but we will keep our eyes looking at that story, as well as the other election results, and you can get all those results on foxnews.com as well.
All right, straight ahead, will the new balance of power in D.C. change the president's agenda? I bet it does.
Sponsored by Dr. Pepper.
Joins us live next.
And will Nancy Pelosi and her San Francisco values push Congress too far to the left? We ask former House Majority Leader Tom DeLay. You're watching the Fox News Channel, America's Newsroom. We'll be right back.
I saw good friends of mine go down tonight, and I regret that. Mike DeWine, Rick Santorum, and others, they're good and decent people.
If you watched that, you went to bed around 2 in the morning. So therefore, I'm going to give you a total recap of what you missed. Welcome, everybody. Democrats take control of the House, winning the majority and ousting some big names from the Republican Party. They're still in the party, but not in power. In Connecticut, 12-term Congresswoman Nancy Johnson loses Democratic newcomer Chris Murphy. In Pennsylvania, 10-term Congressman Kurt Weldon, a late problem with his daughter and employment helped defeat him. The winner, Joe Sestak, has now gotten his seat. And Florida gives Democratic challenger Ron Klein the win, unseating 13-term Representative Clay Shaw. Senate now. Still anyone's game. The Democrats need 2 seats for the majority with just 2 states left to call. Yes, it's true. Showdown in Virginia. Incumbent Senator George Allen and challenger Jim Webb neck and neck, although Webb says, I won already. In Montana, a similar situation. Preliminary results have Montana going to Democrat John Tester. He has a slight lead over Conrad Burns. We expect to get a winner there shortly. At 13 minutes after the hour, it's time to bring in a guy that's been analyzing this on the fly with Britt Hume in a studio just across the hall, right, Bill Kristol?
Absolutely. And just to clarify that excellent summary, I think in the House, there's still some seats we haven't called. I think we'll end up with about a 30 to 32 seat swing.
It's 26 now, I understand.
Now, but I think there are about 10 outstanding that are too close to call, a couple hundred votes that we haven't formally called. So I think we'll end up with a Democratic majority in the House of about 15 or 16, almost exactly what the Republican majority was going in. So the House just flipped from a Republican 15-seat margin to a Democratic 15-seat margin, which is enough to govern. I mean, that's what the key there is. People thought ahead of time it might be 2 seats or 4 seats. And in the Senate, my personal view is that the margins are enough to stand up. I think the Democrats will win the Senate. I don't believe there'll be months of recounts and lawyering in Virginia. If he's got a 7,000 vote margin with 6 precincts out, and precincts are pretty small in Virginia, Webb will win, and I think Tester's got a 1 percentage point lead in Montana. So I think we're looking at a Democratic House pretty comfortably and a 51-49 Democratic Senate with Joe Lieberman as the deciding Democratic senator.
Which is what I've been talking about for an hour now. Where is Bill Kristol? Because I want to ask Bill Kristol, how is Lieberman going to handle this? Yesterday when we interviewed him live on the program, he says, hey, I'm caucusing with Democrats, but not so fast. Do you think, first of all, he will flip parties? And second of all, what kind of power is this guy going to have in the Senate?
He'll stay with the Democrats, but he will be a very powerful senator. He is the majority. He can put together a coalition of moderate Democrats, and there are about a half dozen. He's got very good relations across the aisle, obviously with John McCain, but with many other Republicans, and an awful lot of Republicans voted for him yesterday in Connecticut. He could be a really key senator. If I were President Bush, I guess you have to call Speaker Pelosi as a courtesy, maybe Majority Leader Reid, assuming he becomes Majority Leader. I'd have Joe Lieberman on the phone pretty quickly and try to talk to him about the war and about domestic issues, because you can have Bush can still be a powerful president, especially with Democrats like Lieberman in the Senate and in the House. A lot of those new Democrats are moderate and conservative.
Nixon, Reagan, Eisenhower, similar situations. They dealt with it. What will you expect to hear, or what would you coach President Bush to say if he wanted to set the tone to make the next 2 years productive?
He's obviously got to be gracious and talk about bipartisanship and working with Democrats, and I think he has to do some of that. But I think he also has to make clear that he understands he is the President of the United States. He was elected for 4 years. He has unique responsibilities, especially in foreign policy, and he cannot waver in fighting in the Central Front on the war against Islamic jihadism. He needs to build bipartisan support for that war. That might require personnel changes and tactical changes.
Personnel changes, Rumsfeld. I mean, a lot of people said, hey, you should have gotten rid of Rumsfeld before this election. Maybe it would have motivated more Republicans to come out and vote, and maybe Democrats or independents to not vote Democratic. Your feelings, will he get rid of Rumsfeld now?
I think Secretary Rumsfeld will offer his resignation. I think he almost has to as a courtesy to President Bush, and I think President Bush will accept it. Because the war is more important than one man, and the truth is, to win this war, and I've been a critic of Rumsfeld for a while, so people can discount this, but I really believe this, to win this war, it will be helpful to have a new secretary. No one man is indispensable, you know, and it will be helpful to have a new Secretary of Defense, to give a new face to the war, to make the case to the American people, to work with Congress. Rumsfeld has very bad relations with the Democrats in the House and in the Senate, who are going to control the armed services committees and those bodies. It would just be, I think, for the sake of the war, I think Rumsfeld will step aside.
But why did he wait? Why did the president wait if that's the ultimate move?
Well, look, I was for accepting Rumsfeld's resignation 2 years ago, but they don't always take my advice. I know that's a surprise. And look, to be fair to Bush, he thought Rumsfeld was the right guy, and he stuck with him. I just think Rumsfeld will submit his resignation, and Bush will accept it.
Column in Washington Times saying that Senator McCain's stock went up after this.
Yeah, maybe, but actually, you know, all the leading Republican candidates are outsiders who I think can all present themselves as reformers. John McCain has a long history on that. Giuliani, Romney, Newt Gingrich, you know, who I think is going to emerge an awful lot in the next few months, saying, hey, when I was in Congress, we were a reforming party. We got away from that. We lost in 2006. Who's the last Republican who led the Republicans back to majority status, or to majority status? Newt Gingrich. So I think all four leading Republican candidates for 2008, McCain, Giuliani, Romney, and Gingrich, are in a way have a plausible story to tell about how they can lead the party back to majority status.
Fascinating stuff. I mean, this is why you're got in this business, to tell us what's coming up next.
I thought about that last night.
There's nothing like watching.
I hope so. Well, you have a lot of clout here, so if you could make that case, that would be helpful.
All right, great to see you, Bill. Go home and get some sleep.
I'll do that.
Okay. And don't forget, you can find the results to all races on FoxNews.com.
Or call Bill Kristol at home.
Yeah, exactly.
And his number? 202.
Thank you, Ray.
Hey, how will Democratic House majority govern differently? We'll all talk about that. You're watching Fox and Friends. That's the new speaker, if you're just waking up.
Good morning, I'm Lauren Green. In the news, the Supreme Court hears arguments this morning over a disputed abortion procedure. Justices will consider the fate of the Partial Birth Abortion Ban Act. It outlaws a rarely used late-term abortion procedure. 6 federal courts have struck down the law, saying it restricts women's rights. The Bush administration is urging the Supreme Court to uphold the ban. Fox News will have coverage from the Supreme Court later this morning. The Hamas leader says the truce with Israel is now over, and his militants can begin fighting Israelis once again. The statement came after Israeli tank shells killed 18 Palestinians in Gaza City. The Palestinian Health Ministry says 10 children and 7 women were among the dead. Penn State coach Joe Paterno has to stay in the hospital just a little bit longer after having surgery on his left leg. Doctors say they'll keep him at least through today, and as a precaution, though, Paterno fractured his shin bone and tore 2 ligaments in his knee when 2 players fell into him on the sidelines. The team spokesman says Paterno hasn't been the best rehab patient, and he's eager to get back to practice. Later in the show, Larry Sabato looks back at his election predictions, and we'll see what he got right and wrong. And those are your headlines. Fox and Friends continues right now.
All right, Lauren, thank you very much. Joining us right now from our D.C. Bureau is former Representative Tom DeLay, former House Majority Leader. Good morning to you, sir.
Well, it's morning anyway. It's not a very good morning. Thank you, Steve.
And you're talking about the fact that the Democrats have taken control of the House of Representatives right now. The power balance is hanging in the, you know, we don't know, too close in 2 different races in Montana and also Virginia. What went wrong for the Republicans?
Well, I think when you forget your principles and you play not to lose, you lose. The Republicans took a real Texas whipping last night, and we need to regroup and stand on principle. I think it's going to be very difficult for us now to win the war on terror because of a different worldview and power in the House of Representatives. Fundamental tax reform's out the window for a while. stopping judicial activism, overturning the culture of death is going to be very difficult to do with Democrats in control in the House.
Yeah, Congressman, how much do you blame yourself and other Republicans? Because even though most people feel you are getting ramrodded, you're in the middle of this corruption swirling around between Bob Ney, between Duke Cunningham and yourself. All people are hearing about is legal issues.
Well, I think it certainly had a lot to do with it. We spotted them 10 seats that had some sort of a problem. Me personally, I haven't been found guilty of anything. I haven't done anything wrong, but others did, and that came back to haunt them.
Yeah. Congressman, you said when you forget your principles, you lose. What principles would you like to see the Republicans in the House get back to?
Well, we need fundamental tax reform in this country. We need to redesign the government, limited government. We need to stop an overactive judiciary. We need to stop abortion as we know it. These are the things. I mean, the Democrats didn't win. The Republicans lost. This country is still right of center. If our base had stuck with us and didn't want to send us a message, we would have won. And we got to articulate those issues and stand up for what we believe in and fight for what we believe in.
Congressman, Nancy Pelosi is talking about a bipartisan, let's get along attitude. How long will this last? Is the speaker is the future speaker, the woman that you know, capable of doing that?
Absolutely not. She'll be bipartisan as long as you buy into her partisanship. As long as you go along with her, she'll work with you. That's the way she's been. That's the way she'll lead. I think she's going to have a hard time, though. Almost every new chairman has been here for over 30 years, and that's one of the reasons they lost. Is the chairman had these little kingdoms. I think they'll want to rebuild those kingdoms again, and she's going to have a tough time leading.
Former House Majority Leader Tom DeLay, we thank you very much, sir, for joining us today from Washington.
My pleasure.
Back in a moment.
Today's weather is brought to you.
We're going to call this You Decided 2006. Here are the results.
This has been an interesting election, and the election continues. As Senator Warner said, good morning, Patriots.
That's right. We're still watching for the results in 2 Senate races that will determine which party holds control of the Senate. Here we are in Virginia. The votes are so tight that it may take a recount to determine the winner. However, the Democratic challenger already declaring a victory, and that, of course, is Mr. Webb. The other Senate race that could make all the difference is in Montana, where John Tester and Conrad Burns are neck and neck. Tester already says, I won. The future of the House is pretty clear. Democrats have swept into power, making San Francisco liberal Nancy Pelosi the next likely Speaker of the House. They've already picked up 26 seats, could go higher. The U.S. Ambassador to Iraq is telling Iraqis not to worry about the midterm elections. He says American policy won't drastically change now that Democrats have control of the House. Meanwhile, reports say Saddam Hussein's second in command, Mr. al-Duri, has ordered some militants to stop attacks in Iraq. Time to make peace, he says now. We're covering all the angles in the election aftermath. Fair and balanced as always. This is Fox and Friends.
Come on over here.
I will.
Also, some state-by-state initiatives. A number of states passed same-sex marriage bans, and there was an interesting item on the agenda up in Seattle. Voters have overwhelmingly rejected a measure that would have required lap dancers to stand 4 feet away from patrons.
Really?
It also would have required bright lights in strip clubs and prohibited customers from giving money directly to strippers. So
wait a minute, they passed that or they didn't?
In Seattle, the lap dance is safe.
So put your rulers away.
That's the headline, according to the Associated Press. Lap dances are safe in Seattle.
That's fantastic.
That was definitely on the top of the list for the rest of the country to be very concerned about. And in the meantime, Greg Kelly has the roundup, I guess, from the House briefing room. Greg, I know you probably don't want to comment on the Seattle story.
Whoa.
Or maybe you do.
It might have driven me to the polls. All right, that's all I'll say. I'm not saying how I would have voted. Very good. Good morning, Gretchen, Brian, and Steve. President Bush obviously disappointed, and he is waking up today to a political world that is radically different. And many analysts in this town believe that what happened last night and yesterday really was a rejection, not only President Bush, but his policies, and in particular what Americans registered is a disapproval of how the war in Iraq is being executed. Now, President Bush found out that the House was lost. We're told at about 11 o'clock last night. Karl Rove gave him the news. Tony Snow says the president is obviously disappointed. He also points out, as he says, that it is now the Democrats have the responsibility to help this president win the war on terror and keep the economy going. Now, the president made one congratulatory phone call last night to a Republican in upstate New York who won a race narrowly. He was charged, Tom Reynolds, with marshaling the national campaigns to keep the House of Representatives. In the final days before the election, President Bush, of course, was out on the stump campaigning for some Republicans where it was determined that the president could help and not hurt them. But in the end, some of those candidates that the president campaigned for did lose. Shelley Sekula Gibbs, who's running for Tom DeLay's seat in Texas, Jim Ryan of Kansas, Jim Nussle of Iowa, a gubernatorial candidate, also lost. And on the senatorial side, we don't know who won or lost, Democrats or Republicans at this point, but we do know that Jim Talent, who the president campaigned for aggressively just a couple of days ago across Missouri, he went down to defeat. We don't know yet about John Tester and Conrad Burns. John Tester appears to be in a slight lead at this point. That's the competitive race in Montana. The president was there for Conrad Burns just last Thursday. Now, remember, the president was optimistic about his party's chances all through it. He predicted that the Republicans would be victorious, not only in the House, but in the Senate. He made that prediction all the way up until the very end. He was proved wrong, at least for the House, and that's one of the questions he'll have to confront as he speaks to reporters at 1 o'clock this afternoon from the East Room of the White House. We'll be there. Back to you guys in New York.
All right, Greg Kelly, we thank you very much. Meanwhile, the governor out west said, "I love a sequel," because he gets another term.
And did he get a lieutenant governor elected as well, and possibly a controller, so it's no longer a solidly Democratic state? Is that true, William Lajeunesse? Because you're alive in Los Angeles, and we hear good things about the Terminator.
Oh, well, that's true. Arnold Schwarzenegger he ripped his Democratic opponent, but no, all the major offices in in California, other than governor, are pretty much Democratic. In fact, former Governor Jerry Brown is now the new Attorney General here. But I also, on the light side, I want to let you know in Santa Monica, they approved a depenalizing marijuana. It is now the lowest priority for cops, so now you have a better chance of getting a ticket by smoking a cigarette than a joint. But there are some big surprises out here, and one was up in Northern California where Richard Pombo, a 7-term congressman, has been defeated by Jerry McNerney. He is a political neophyte. Pombo was a vocal opponent of the current Endangered Species Act and chairman of the House Natural Resources Committee. In Arizona, a very nasty race there. J.D. Hayworth was beaten by challenger Harry Mitchell. Now, Hayworth was a soldier in the Republican Revolution, first elected in '94, a hardliner in illegal immigration. He was up by 15 points, and he lost to former mayor of Tempe, State Senator Harry Mitchell, who favors stem cell research and a guest worker bill. On the propositions, California had about a dozen, including one to tax domestic oil production. That was backed by President Clinton and Al Gore. It was defeated. So was a tax on cigarettes and a parental consent bill for minors seeking abortion. But voters did approve an initiative requiring sex offenders to wear a GPS ankle bracelet for life. In Arizona, several propositions dealing with illegal immigration all passed. Now, they are prohibited from receiving bail. They are not allowed to receive punitive damages from civil suits, and illegals would be banned from receiving a in-state tuition for college tuition. And finally, also in Arizona, they did reject a ban on same-sex marriage. However, they did approve a bill on humane treatment for animals. Now you cannot tether a pig or a cow in Arizona. They have to also be allowed to walk around in a cage. It can't be too small. And finally, in Washington State, there's that one outstanding race because of the very bad weather up there. That still could go Democratic. That is the race between Dave Reichart, the incumbent Republican, and Darcy Berner. That's a 51-49% race with 31% reporting. And Steve, we are going to hand it back to you to update us on the weather.
All right, William, we thank you very much. William, that's nuts out in Santa Monica where you can actually be cited for a cigarette before the joint you've got in the other hand.
what am I going to say? It's Santa Monica.
Okay, there you go. All right. Thank you, sir. What are you going to say about the weather? In the deep south, some rain moving through Atlanta today. Meanwhile, Hartford, Connecticut, a little bit of rain there through the Ohio Valley, just some cloud cover. Lansing in Michigan, a beautiful day and 55. Meanwhile, Orlando, 76. And it's going to be mostly sunshiny across much of Florida today. A little high, thin cloudiness. Same thing for Minneapolis. But look at these temperatures in the northern plains. It's going to be about 70, Gretchen, in your hometown of Minneapolis. And then in the central plains states, Lincoln and Topeka, temperatures approaching 80. We're going to have a whole bunch of 80s down in Texas. And I've got some exciting news about Texas in just a minute. Meanwhile, tonight's lows will be in the 40s and 50s. And finally, out west, look at that. At Arnold's Place in Sacramento, a bit of rain on this Wednesday. I mentioned Texas. I'm coming to Texas. Attention, Texas. I'm coming to Houston. The Mr. and Mrs. Happy Handbook, the #1 humor book in America. It is also in the New York Times top 10. And I'm going to be at Borders on Kirby Street. Kirby Drive, that is to say, 7:30 Friday in Houston, and then Saturday at 2 Borders Books Preston Oaks Shopping Center in Dallas. The big question, which town will show up in bigger numbers? Will it be Houston? Will it be Dallas? It's the battle of the bookstores, so I'll see you this weekend, you guys.
Like they need something else to enhance their rivalry, Dallas and Houston.
They got a big one, and so I want to find out. Brian and I have made a wager. Brian thinks one of the towns is going to show up in bigger numbers. I think the other. We will reveal our preferences or our predictions on Monday.
Is it in a sealed envelope?
No, it's just in our feeble little heads.
What we're betting is our cars. I'm betting my Expedition. I'm putting my 98 Expedition up.
Oh, man.
What are you putting up?
Wow. Does your wife know about that?
No.
I'm putting my wife's truck up.
You putting
of course. They're putting both of their wives' cars up.
Yeah.
What a shock.
Either way, we're going to be filling them up with a lot of gas. Meanwhile, 22 minutes before the top of the hour. Big changes likely now that the Democrats control the House. How will it affect the war in Iraq, and what about the effect on you?
We're going to take a closer look and order in the court. Judge Andrew Napolitano, hey, he got 2 hours of sleep, but you know what? He was more giddy this morning than I've ever seen him before in my life. Gotta love this guy.
He was barely sober.
He's always with it and on top of things, and he's going to talk to us about election lawyers and what they're up to this morning, the day after the midterm elections. You're watching Fox News Channel, America's Newsroom.
We know there are problems, and we know that we're going to face some difficult solutions. But I am very grateful because what's happening across our country today is a good sign that democracy and our Constitution are alive and well.
Welcome back, everyone. A quick recap for you of the latest election action. The balance of power in the Senate is still up for grabs this morning. Democrats have gained 4 seats, but races in Virginia and Montana are too close to call still. The winners there will determine which party has control. The House of Representatives has shifted to the Democrats. They take control of the House after being out of power for a dozen years. Voters also decided a number of ballot measures yesterday. In South Dakota, a ban on almost all abortions, that was rejected, but amendments to ban gay marriage were approved in 7 states. Voters in Arizona decided to make English the official state language. Later on in the show, we'll take a look at the claims of voting problems and how they played into the final results as well.
Hey, let's take a look at some of the races that we've been tracking. We thought many times, Steve, were too close to call. For example, an exciting race, especially for Harold Ford. He made this a lot closer than many people thought. He ran a strong campaign for a while. He was out in front. In the end, he fell short to Bob Corker.
That's exactly right. Also, Joe Lieberman, we had, let's go to Maryland. And you know what? It looks as if the Democrat wins resoundingly by 10 points, Cardin over Steele. That's a headline grabber with 97%.
Steele left with just about everyone's respect and a national profile.
And speaking of national profile, Ned Lamont beat Joe Lieberman in the primary. Then Lieberman popped out of the Democratic Party. He became an I, and yesterday the ayes had it.
And in New Jersey, the incumbent, Menendez, easily beat Tom Kean. That was a bit of a surprise in light of the fact that Menendez could be indicted relatively soon.
Yeah, and in Rhode Island,
that's a small print.
Lincoln Chafee was. Everyone was saying that he has closed it in. In fact, he had a slight lead on Election Day. In the end, it was Whitehouse who walks away with the victory. Chafee, too Republican, although he seemed and voted like a Democrat.
Meanwhile, speaking of Joe Lieberman, listen, he won big, and he was happy that the people supported him and his new party, whatever that is. Here he is saying thanks so much last night in Connecticut.
This year's campaign, to say the obvious, was a long journey on which you, my dear supporters, and I were tested like never before. But we never wavered in our beliefs or in our purpose, did we?
Last night, he had Joe-mentum. Meanwhile, let's take a look at some of the emails that you are sending to us. For instance, Donald writes in, thank goodness the people have spoken. Time for some serious changes. Meanwhile, Robert writes from Iowa, one thing for sure this morning, and that is bin Laden is dancing in his cave.
Lots of emails that are talking about that. From Buttercup Baker, gotta look at the name. Everyone is saying that the Dems took the election because of the disapproval of the war. No, it's strike one, Katrina, strike two, the war, strike three, Mark Foley, and foul ball funding a 700-mile fence instead of building better levees in New Orleans.
Everyone talks about a middle-class tax cut. Well, Tammy wonders what she is. She says, I would love to know how the Democrats are going to help the middle class. In fact, I would love to know what the middle class is. I hear we're all poor or we're all rich. I consider to myself neither. Maybe once defined that I can understand what they have planned for me. Also, Paul says this, with the Democrats soft on national security and the NSA program, my hope is that we are not attacked in this country within the next 2 years. Paul in Pittsburgh.
All right. We thank you very much. You can send us some more email, friends@foxnews.com. And speaking of foxnews.com, we've got all the state-by-state election info at foxnews.com. You'll see an icon for You Decide 2006. Just click on it, and there's the stuff.
And just ahead on Fox and Friends, Republican reaction to the Dems' big House win. We'll say Speaker Pelosi and CFRNC Chairman Ken Mehlman cringes, agrees with us, whatever his reaction is.
Larry Sabato's coming up, too. He had a prediction. Was he right? From the University of Virginia. You're watching Fox and Friends. Back in a moment.
Good morning. I'm Lauren Green. In the news this morning, a state of emergency in Oregon as a massive Pacific storm leaves behind up to 15 inches of rain in some areas. More than 100 people were forced to abandon their homes, with all major roads shut down in Tillamook County. Meanwhile, Washington State is still recovering from the same storm system. Water levels surged to near-record highs. One river actually changed its course, carrying off one home and threatening damage to at least 300 more. One person was killed by the storm. The Hamas leader says the truce with Israel is now over and his militants can begin fighting Israelis once again. The statement came after Israeli tank shells killed 18 Palestinians in Gaza City. The Palestinian Health Ministry says 10 children and 7 women were among the dead. Britney Spears appears upbeat, if a little off balance, as she takes to the ice skating rink at New York's Rockefeller Center, just hours after cutting K-Fed loose. The pop princess filed for divorce from dancer hubby and aspiring rap star Kevin Federline. Married in 2004, and the couple married in 2004 and are the parents of 2 boys. And later in the show, Judge Andrew Napolitano exposes the potential election legal challenges, that of attorneys mouth-watering. And those are your headlines. Fox and Friends first. Now Fox and Friends continues.
All right, you decided 2006. Nancy Pelosi will probably be named Speaker of the House after the Democrats took control of the House for the first time since 1994 in a dozen years. Let's get reaction right now from Republican National Committee Chairman Ken Mehlman. He joins us live from their headquarters in Washington, D.C. Good morning to you, sir.
Morning.
What happened?
Well, obviously, I was disappointed in the results last night, and not only in the ultimate result on a personal level. People like Rick Santorum and Jim Talent and Mike DeWine are friends, and I'm sorry that they're not going to continue serving. I think they served our country well, and they're people of great principle. I think the American people clearly sent a message, and it's a message we need to understand and we need to listen to, and we as Republicans need to follow. I see 3 things out of it. First of all, we need to recommit ourselves to our conservative reform principles. That's very important. We need to try to work where we can on a bipartisan basis with Democrats. We need to bend over backwards to try to do that while maintaining those conservative reform principles. And I think another thing, the #1 issue that was listed is corruption. We need to remember people that serve, in whether it's in the Congress or in the government or at any level, are people that ought to be about public policy and public service. That ought to be their basis.
Right.
It ought not to be continuing your power in office, but what you're trying to accomplish and what you're trying to reform. If we can focus on those three things, then while last night was very difficult for many of us, ultimately we will be stronger and we'll be able to serve the public better because we'll have learned and grown from it.
I know you've probably got other polling information, but according to the Associated Press, they said that turnout, despite the rumor that it might be really high, and it was high in some spots, but generally across the board it was about 40%, which is average for a midterm. And more Democrats turned out than Republicans. What happened to the much vaunted get out the vote machine that Karl Rove and company supposedly had waiting in the wings?
Well, I think if you look at the races around the country, I think there were 22 races that were very close. We won 14 of those 22. What that operation is able to do is able to mobilize people in the very close races. I think it was effective in many of those races. But look, after the '04 election, when everyone talked about how fantastic our machine was, we spent a lot of time analyzing precinct by precinct data to say, how do we make it better? While I'm very pleased by the number of volunteers, the number of activities, we clearly need to do the same thing again. In my judgment, every election ought to be an opportunity, not only from a policy perspective, but political mechanics, just like you're talking about perspective, to say, how do we make our system better? How do we serve better? How do we do better?
Nancy Pelosi said last night that it's time for more bipartisanship as well. You said that a couple of minutes ago. Although in the last couple of months, she hasn't really been very bipartisan. She's been pretty bitter in some instances, if you remember the 60 Minutes interview. Do you think as Speaker of the House, she's going to be effective in rallying her troops to actually get stuff done? Or do you think it's going to be polarized?
Well, first of all, let me just say I congratulate Nancy Pelosi. Obviously, her caucus has to, and I assume will elect her the first woman speaker. I certainly wish the first woman speaker were a Republican, but she's about to make history, and that's something that all of us should appreciate and applaud her for. I think there's an opportunity, and let me give you a historic analogy. When Harry Truman was president, Republicans like Arthur Vandenberg and others worked with him, recognizing that the Soviet threat during the Cold War was a threat that wasn't a threat against Democrats or Republicans, but against all Americans. I believe the same thing is true in the threat against Islamic fascism, excuse me. And I think there's no reason we can't also work together on a bipartisan basis on an issue like that. There are other issues, too. Immigration reform is one we ought to be able to work on a bipartisan basis for. Health care reform is one. You know, the president had a proposal last year that said for folks who can't afford their own health care, we're going to give them a portable health care plan called a health savings account they can take with them from job to job. That's something that whether you're a conservative like I am or a progressive, you ought to be for.
All right. Ken Millman, the RNC chief.
Thanks
Sir,
a lot.
we thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks.
All right, it's about 4.5 minutes before the top of the hour. Remember, you can get all of your election results at foxnews.com. Just click on that You Decide 2006. All of it is at your fingertips. We'll be right back. Good morning, people. America has decided, and there are mixed reactions this morning from the two parties.
I think when you forget your principles and you play not to lose, you lose.
We had a great victory last night. I meant what I said, though, is that the work of reform begins today.
That's the word after Democrats take charge of the House of Representatives. The results mean Nancy Pelosi and her San Francisco values will likely be the next House Speaker. But it's a different story in the U.S. Senate, where the balance of power is still up for grabs. Races that are too close to call in Virginia and Montana will ultimately determine which party is in charge there. The Dems need one, the Republicans need two, the Republicans need one. Meanwhile, the U.S. ambassador to Iraq is assuring the Iraqi people that America's policies won't drastically change with the new face of Congress. He says President Bush sees success in Iraq as imperative for America's national interests. We have election results from coast to coast. Plus, how are lawyers gearing up this morning for political battles? All that and so much more on this special edition of Fox and Friends, The Morning After.
Yeah, this is the morning after, the morning that keeps on going, because I know a lot of people did not get any sleep last night.
Really?
Lots of people, and a lot of people got up early as well to join us, hopefully, to find out about the election results. You know, one of those guys was Larry Sabato out of Virginia, University of Virginia. He's been doing this political game for a long time. He had a list of predictions of how this whole election was going to pan out, and we're going to touch base with him to see whether or not
he was
right.
about the most accurate of all the pundits going into it. Also, Martin Frost, former congressman from Texas, is going to be joining us to talk about how the Dems have swept control of the House of Representatives.
He went up against Howard Dean. He wanted to run the DNC, and Howard Dean got it. And yesterday, he was on the radio yesterday with us, and he said that, look, I got to give some credit to Howard Dean. He had a 50-state strategy not to give up anywhere, and a lot of places normally went Republican. They went Democrat this time.
Also, the legal challenges potentially from this election. Judge Andrew Napolitano is going to stop back in and talk to us about those legal challenges. He had a very interesting perspective earlier, you guys, when he was saying that unless the particular ballots in question could sway the election one way or another with regard to how many there are, that there would not even be any investigating into them. So in other words, in Virginia, where it looks like there's an 8,000 vote difference, whether or not that recount will happen, it looks like it will, but we're going to ask him more about that when he shows up.
But as Steve will attest to, a lot of times the judge makes stuff up.
Sure.
And that could have been
Why
one of
not?
the cases.
Yeah,
Well,
I'm kidding. He's
2 hours
just a thanks
sleep.
guy.
Yeah, he might have made something
He
up.
did. He was on with Shep at 2 o'clock, and he was back here at 5 o'clock.
You know, so one of the headlines this morning is after we heard all of these predictions, you're going to go and you're going to try to vote, and that stinking new voting machine ain't going to work. You know what? For the most part, they worked, which is terrific. There were some isolated incidents where different things went haywire, but you know, for the most part, it did work, and that is refreshing. However, at the end of the day, as they total things up, it was not exactly, it certainly was not what the Republicans had hoped to see result-wise. Tom DeLay, former top guy in the Congress, talked to us in the last hour, his reaction to the Dems winning the House.
The Democrats didn't win. The Republicans lost. This country is still right of center. If our base had stuck with us and didn't want to send us a message, we would have won.
That's very honest, very candid. Here's what the president said last night. He made one call to Tom Reynolds to congratulate him for retaining his congressional seat over in New York, and he plans on talking to the future Speaker of the House, assumedly Pelosi, a little bit later on today. But he does say he looks forward to working with the Democrats. According to Tony Snow, he says, of course, he's disappointed, but he's looking forward to working. He's got a big agenda over the next 2 years and wants to see it through.
All right. In Ohio, that was an interesting Senate race there. The incumbent, Mike DeWine, lost pretty handily to Sherrod Brown there. And here we have the numbers there. That was expected to happen, especially in the last week or so. It did not look good for Senator DeWine.
So, and meanwhile, our exclusive Fox News phone poll, where we polled 900 people on the phone, this is separate from the big network exit polls, 30% of Ohio voters say the Bush administration's tax cuts were bad for the country.
Well, that's low.
Voted for Brown by a margin of, as you can see, 90% to 8%.
Now, this is Senator Santorum and it's more on the exit poll. Senator Santorum lost, and he lost by a wide margin over in Pennsylvania, and he was the #3 guy in the Republican Party, and he loses to Casey, who, by the way, a lot of people, according to Senator Santorum, a lot of people were voting for Casey thinking he was his dad, who was a very popular figure but had passed away. But Casey wins handily. He'll have that position. Senator Santorum had a very nice speech, concession speech a little bit earlier. Also, it didn't help Senator Santorum that his good buddy Joe Paterno has a broken leg and got hurt on Saturday. Maybe that was a precursor of what he's experienced. But the bigger story has to be Missouri, because the Republicans thought we got to find a way to keep Jim Talent in office. They didn't.
That's right. Claire McCaskill, who had that very potent ad that featured Michael J. Fox, she did beat Jim Talent in Missouri. And here are the final results with, well, pretty close to the final, 98% of the precincts. It's a pickup for the Democrats. As you can see, she had 49% of the vote. He had 47%. And also one other race of note, that would be the great state of Connecticut. And Joe Lieberman had represented the Democratic Party for many, many years there. But of course, Ned Lamont beat him in the primary. But you know what? As it turns out, Joe won. He wound up on top at the end switch to the Independent Party, and there he is, the big winner.
And a lot of Republicans, no doubt, voted for Joe Lieberman. He had a lot of Republican support going into the final weeks of that election. It remains to be seen exactly what kind of power he is going to hold in the Senate as an independent.
Now, think about this. What does Joe Lieberman and Arnold Schwarzenegger have in common? Does anyone know? You guys can play, too.
They're both action figures?
No.
They both had sequels?
No one wants to play. They're exhausted.
They both had sequels?
No. Muscular, yes. They have one person, very muscular, similar builds. Both got their big break in bodybuilding. So
Sure.
that's, you're right, Ian. Thanks for playing. I will say Mayor Bloomberg supported both of them, came across with big numbers.
Right.
And what happens? The two big winners, the two most intriguing races out of this, and maybe there's something to learn here, Senator Lieberman and Governor Schwarzenegger.
You know, and in addition to Mayor Bloomberg, who some have postulated could be running for president next time around, in addition to the fact that he supported Joe Lieberman with a fundraiser, and remember, Bloomberg is a Republican.
He was a Democrat.
That's right. He's a switch hitter there, party-wise. Bloomberg actually helped Claire McCaskill as well, a Democrat in Missouri, because Mr. Bloomberg is squarely behind stem cell research. And he thought that if he could devote some of the energy of, and I think he sent some staff members out to Missouri to help with her race, that was the best chance to getting some sort of stem cell action in the U.S. Senate.
I think he gave $100 million to Johns Hopkins.
He certainly did, all about stem cell. In the meantime, Molly Henneberg is joining us right now from our nation's capital. And Molly, we were talking a moment ago about how a couple of races are still too close to call.
Virginia and Montana, that's right. But overall, the margin in the Senate is Republicans 49, Democrats and Independents 49. 2 Senate seats are up for grabs. Both are too close to call, but the Democratic candidates are leading in both of those races, Virginia and Montana. If that holds, the Senate could end up 51-49 Democrats when it's all said and done. Let's take a look at what happened yesterday and into the night. Democrats picked up seats, which you see here in blue, in Rhode Island, Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Missouri. That's 4. They need 6 to get control of the Senate. Republicans were able to hold on to a competitive Senate seat in Tennessee, seen here in red. Virginia and Montana, highlighted in yellow, that's where all the attention is going to be today. They're yet to be decided. In Virginia, that race is likely headed toward a recount. Democratic candidate Jim Webb is declaring victory. He's ahead by about 7,800 votes out of over 2 million cast. Incumbent Senator George Allen is not conceding. He says there are still votes to be counted, including absentee ballots. At this point, the state is too close to call. Allen says he's still in it. Webb is claiming victory.
We all go out, we vote, we argue, we vote. But also, we'd like to say that the votes are in and we won.
I know the counting will continue through the night. It'll continue tomorrow. And I want to thank you all, because I know you're going to be like a bunch of eagles and hawks watching how every one of these votes are accurately counted.
In Montana, Democratic candidate John Tester is ahead of incumbent Senator Conrad Burns by about 1,500 votes. Now, if it gets down to about 1,000 votes, that would automatically trigger a recount in Montana. In Virginia, by the way, they are at the threshold where Allen could request a recount. But in Montana, due to some computer problems, we may not have the final results for several more hours. Steve, back to you with some weather.
All right, Molly. Molly, if you were outside right now, you'd need a slicker because it's raining.
It's pouring. I just went out to move my car. You're right.
You have to move your own car? Don't you have people? Where's Greg Kelly?
What about Brian Wilson?
Yeah.
I'll call Greg and see if he could help me out next time.
Now, wait a minute. This is fascinating. You're a big TV star. So what do you park illegally on the street until you figure the meter maids are probably awake and I got to move it to a legal spot?
No, I had to work overnight, and at 7 a.m., the cops come around and ticket all the cars that are parked in metered parking. So you got to get out there before 7 a.m. and move your car. So.
What about Wallace? He only works 1 day a week.
That's all.
You'd think he could help.
That's right. All right, Molly, thank you very much.
All right.
All right, Molly, our little weather watcher down there in the District of Columbia indicated that it is pouring. Move your cars if they were the meter maids are out on the street in force. Meanwhile, as you can see, the rain right up through portions of New England, back through the Appalachians, and we got some rain flowing through the Tennessee Valley. Also a little action up there in the northern plains and portions of the Great Lakes as well. All right, let's take a look at the day ahead real quickly. Down in Florida, temperatures will be in the 70s. Then we got some rain right on up through New England. It should be dry for the most part in Detroit. today down in Texas. Look at this. Temperatures in the 80s and sunshiny. Up in the northern plains, 50s and 60s, and a bit of rain on this Wednesday. And in Southern California, a great day. A little bit of rain up in Spokane and Tahoe and Great Falls, 40s. Nice and sunshiny, though, as well in Vail, Colorado, 53, the daytime high. All right, it's 10 minutes now after the top of the hour. Yes, Brian?
If I could have my druthers, you have better condition, you have better relationship with Toba, who works in audio. Could you get the phone ringing noise? Could you get a ring as if the phone's ringing?
Why would you like that?
Because we have a phone call that just came through, and I'd like to reenact it.
All right, sure. You mean you wound up with an email about a phone call?
No, this is an urgent file. This is a phone call made.
Right.
Can you ask Toba if we can get the phone ring?
Toba, hold on a second. Everybody turn away. Toba, could we get the sound effect for the phone thing?
Thank you.
Definitely
what
rotary.
Part do you want to play?
No, I don't think we can reenact it, but I will say this. I'm going to let you read it because you have a nicer speaking voice.
Well, I don't know about that, but we just have word in, actually, on a serious note, that President Bush did call the likely new Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, to offer his congratulations to her in the hopes that they can work together. He also placed a call to House Speaker Dennis Hastert and thanked him for running a good campaign.
Yeah, and he goes on to say he pledged to work together. The phone call was described as cordial. Other phone calls were made to Congressman Steny Hoyer and Rahm Emanuel. Both Pelosi and Hoyer were invited to attend lunch with the president at the White House on Thursday so they can start to strategize on how to work together. The president also called Harry Reid to congratulate him on a well-run Senate campaign, as well as Senator Dick Durbin. Both Reid and Durbin were invited to the White House on Friday for a coffee meeting. All phone calls with Democrats were described as having a nature of goodwill.
Which is interesting because a number of the Democrats have been yelling at the president in a very sharp and borderline, well, partisan way for a while, so I bet it was a little awkward on the phone.
And just to be totally comprehensive on this, Bush also spoke with Majority Whip Mitch McConnell and Majority Leader John Boehner. He also called Senator Bill Frist, who was unreachable because he was traveling.
That's a lot of phone calls this morning.
Sure.
You got to make sure that the hand is out to make the next 2 years productive.
Listen, the president is going to be having a press conference from the East Room of the White House, 1 o'clock this afternoon Eastern Time. You'll see it right here on Fox News. Also, when you go to foxnews.com, you can get all of the election results. Just click on the little icon that says "You Decide 2006."
All right, coming up on Fox News Friends, then there were two. The Senate majority resting on the outcome of Montana and Virginia. Will Democrats gain control?
I can't believe we don't know this yet. Plus, can the new Democratic House team up with the president and get things done? Did that phone call make any progress? Can't we all get along? You're watching Fox News Channel, America's Newsroom.
This just was a little too steep of a mountain to climb, but it was not for want of people helping us climb it. Thank you so very much for your dedication to beliefs in a cause that will not end with tonight. Thank you so very much.
Senator Rick Santorum in Pennsylvania losing last night in that election. And another quick election recap for you this morning. Democrats take control of the House, winning the majority, taking victory in some key races. In the Republican stronghold of Indiana, Democrats captured 3 congressional seats held by the GOP. In one race, 6-term Congressman John Hostetler lost in a landslide to Democrat Brad Ellsworth. Arizona, 6-term Congressman J.D. Hayworth falls to Democrat Harry Mitchell, a former state senator and former mayor of Tempe. Could have all come down to immigration in that one. But in Connecticut, moderate Republican Christopher Shays wins his 11th term in the House. He actually conceded, then he came back and found out that he won in a rematch with Democrat Dianne Farrow. In the Senate, the balance of power is still a toss-up. The Democrats need 2 seats for a majority with just 2 states left to call. We're talking about Virginia. Incumbent Senator George Allen and challenger Jim Webb neck and neck, with Allen refusing to concede and Webb saying he won this race. And preliminary results out of Montana have Democrat John Tester in a lead over Senator Conrad Burns, but that one as well too close to call. A recount likely to start this morning, 7 a.m. Montana time.
Coming up in about 20 minutes, did your vote count? We're going to talk with the woman at the center of that HBO documentary called Hacking Democracy. But first, how did the Democrats pull off their big win last night in the House?
Martin Frost predicted it. He's the former chairman of the Democratic Congressional Committee. These days, he's a Fox News political analyst, and I imagine enjoying every minute of it. From Washington, D.C., Mr. Frost, you thought this would happen. I know you hoped it would happen. What do you think the difference was?
Oh, well, I think there were a couple of things. Clearly, the public wanted to express itself on what's going on in Iraq. The only way they could do that was through congressional elections. Secondly, I really think the corruption issue was very significant. What happened with Abramoff, you had Ney going down. Of course, Cunningham had previously resigned. You had others like Tom DeLay who've been implicated. I think the public decided that the Republicans had had their chance. They'd had 12 years and that they had not been able to perform the way they said they were going to do. And so let's give the other side a chance. The pendulum swings in politics. Also, the fact that the party was competitive all over the country was very significant. You picked up seats in places like Kansas, North Carolina, Arizona that initially hadn't been predicted. So the Democrats were competitive everywhere. They didn't win everywhere, but they really fielded a good slate of candidates. Rahm Emanuel did a terrific job in recruiting attractive candidates all over the country. The party raised enough money. That's the other thing, is that while Republicans always raise more than Democrats, Democrats were very much in the game financially.
Congressman Frost, you ran unsuccessfully against Nancy Pelosi for House Minority Leader 4 years ago. You know her as a competitor then. If she becomes Speaker of the House, is she going to be a centrist, as she claimed last night?
Well, Nancy is a very competent leader. She's very tough. She's held the Democrats together for the last 4 years. I have nothing but admiration for her. You know, when people run against each other for leadership positions, it has nothing to do with personal feelings. People in politics are ambitious. Everyone wants to be a leader in his party. I think Nancy has done a terrific job in the last 4 years. I think the key here is the relationship with President Bush. When President Bush was governor of Texas, he had a Democratic state house and a Republican state senate.
Yeah.
He was able to operate on a cooperative basis back then. Now, granted, Texas Democrats are more conservative than national Democrats, but there is the possibility, and he started this already by making the calls. I think it's in the country's interest that there be bipartisanship. I think that the new Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, will want that also.
All right, Martin Frost. Martin, you're having a good day today, aren't you?
It's a good day. Great day.
We thank you very much for joining us live from the Bureau.
Thank you.
By the way, you can get all the results to all the races that you care about at foxnews.com. Just hop on the internet.
All right. Ahead on Fox and Friends, the Democrats in control of the House with Nancy Pelosi, the next likely House Speaker. What could her San Francisco values, as some say, do to Congress? You're watching Fox and Friends, the best morning show on television. Stay with us. We'll be back. Welcome back, everyone. You're looking at pictures right here of the First Lady and President Bush as they get off of Marine One here. We're expecting to hear from the president today. He's planned a news conference to take place at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. In the meantime, he's spending the morning calling last night's election winners and losers to congratulate them and to thank the losers. During his talk with Nancy Pelosi, the two pledged to work together. It's our understanding they're going to get together for lunch on Thursday. The president also thanked current House Speaker Dennis Hastert for his hard work, saying that he was disappointed, of course, but that he did thank him, saying the GOP ran some good campaigns and it was a tough loss. The president also going to have coffee with some of the other leaders, Democratic leaders, Friday morning as well. So he's been busy this morning making phone calls. He's going to be busy in front of the press at 1 o'clock Eastern Time. I'm sure there's going to be a tremendous amount of questions coming his way about this election and other things.
So we got to see, though, too, because we don't know if he's going to have coffee with Senator Reid. I'm sure Senator Reid will accept. We just don't know if he's going to be the leader in the Senate. We don't know if it's going to be in Montana and Virginia, although both Democratic candidates right now in that Senate race are in the lead. A slight lead, but they can't declare it for either candidate.
And they've got to make sure that they got to recount all the ballots. And remember, the Democrats need to win both of those remaining seats. Mr. Webb, Jim Webb, and then out in Montana, the challenger needs to beat Conrad Burns as well. The Republicans only need to win one of the two seats. Also yesterday, a number of states passed same-sex marriage bans. And when it comes to the governor's state houses, I understand that I think that altogether 6 turnovers. Democrats picked up the state houses in Arkansas, Colorado, New York, Ohio, Massachusetts, and also Maryland as well. Now the Dems take control in at least 28 states. It's the biggest state turnover in a dozen years.
Yeah, also, look, 2 in New Hampshire they lost, 1 in North Carolina the GOP lost, 1 in Kansas they lost. The Dems won the open seats in New York, in Arizona. So there's going to be a lot of change. In fact, Senator Snowe, who easily won re-election over in Maine, Olympia Snowe, says now the president has to revisit Iraq, change policies on Iraq. Some say change secretaries of defense. Maybe that would be something the president would want to do, although he said 2 days ago, no way.
Bill Kristol was here earlier this morning. He said that he would predict that Rumsfeld would turn in his own resignation and that the president would accept that. Just to read a couple emails here, Josh in Atlanta says, I can't honestly say I'm surprised at the election results. President Bush should have dropped Rumsfeld 2 weeks ago, along with the entire Republican Party pushing a lot harder for some serious border security. So immigration, was it on the minds of voters? Was obviously the war in Iraq on the minds of voters? It appears that it was.
Well, speaking of immigration, now the president is more likely to wind up with his guest worker program because his idea for a guest worker program much more in line with the Democrats' approach than the Republicans, who had been in control of the House and have now. There are a number of blue dog Democrats, more moderate, elected yesterday, so it will be interesting to see what shape any sort of immigration reform does take.
3 losers might end up winners. Kane over in New Jersey, Steele over in Maryland, and Ford over in Tennessee. I think all 3 of them will have another day, just not today.
Yeah, they lost yesterday. All right. You can email us, friends@foxnews.com, if you got any questions. Right back.
So much has happened since you went to bed last night. Let me tell you what happened with the election, because yesterday was Election Tuesday. The balance of power in the Senate goes down to 2 races that are still too close to call. In Virginia, the vote is so tight that we could see a recount any moment, even though the Democratic challenger is declaring victory. That's Jim Webb. The other Senate race that could make all the difference is Montana. John Tester and Conrad Burns are neck and neck, which is staggering because Burns was almost in double digits, trailing a short time ago. The balance of power in the House of Representatives shifted to the Democrats. We can tell you that for sure. We just don't know how big the balance is. They took control of the House after being out of power for 12 years. Voters also decided the number of state ballot measures yesterday, including this. In South Dakota, a ban on almost all abortions rejected, but amendments to ban gay marriage were approved in 7 of 8 states. Voters in Arizona decided to make English the official language in the state. Arizona, speak English, or I guess you're going to be forced to leave. We're going to break down all the election results and take a look at some of the potential legal challenges, all on this special edition of Fox and Friends.
Steve Centani's been watching it all night long. The Democrats now in control of the U.S. House of Representatives.
Are you okay? Did you see
that on camera?
The way that he just sat down in the chair?
I felt a little like Kurt Thomas, the gymnast who was kept out of the 1980 games because Jimmy Carter boycotted.
Well, then at the end, you've got to go like this.
No, that's what you do when you get off the balance beam. That's a female thing.
No, guys do that.
Men wave. Men wave.
I thought that they put their hands up when they come off the rings.
That's just to prove they're not. That's what you do at the airport to prove you don't have any weapons.
Anyway, continuing on with short attention span newscast, Steve Centani joins us right now from Washington, D.C. Steve, thanks
Well, is everybody okay up there?
Yeah. Thanks for sitting in the little window for an additional 1 minute.
Of course, no problem. It was fun. And I'll tell you a little bit about the House. The Democrats have taken over in the House. Democrats promising bipartisanship, Republicans looking ahead to the next election after this dramatic shift in the balance of power here in Washington. Now, here's the lay of the land in the House of Representatives after Democrats picked up at least 26 seats in Tuesday's election. They'll probably wind up with a few more, somewhere around 30. Now, they only needed 15 to gain control. They're already up to 26. That means the next Speaker of the House is very likely to be a liberal Democrat from San Francisco, Nancy Pelosi. She's the first woman ever to hold that job. She promised last night an open, honest, and ethical Congress, a clear reference to the scandals that have rocked Capitol Hill, and she said Americans voted for a change of direction on Tuesday. The architect of the Democratic House win is Congressman Rahm Emanuel.
We laid out, I think, a very succinct strategy to nationalize an election around the new direction and around change because the American people wanted change. They were very upset with after 6 years of what I refer to as the endless occupation in Iraq and the wageless recovery here in America. And Democrats offered an alternative that the American people wanted to embrace.
Now, Republicans looking forward to the next election, hoping to take back the House and promising to work with the Democratic majority in the meantime. Here's the postmortem from Tom DeLay, the former Republican leader in the House.
I think when you forget your principles and you play not to lose, you lose. The Republicans took a real Texas whipping last night, and we need to regroup and stand on principle.
Now, the president called the future Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, this morning to congratulate her. He also called the outgoing Speaker, Dennis Hastert, to thank him for running a good campaign. So just to recap, Democrats picking up at least 26 seats in the House, winning control of the House for the first time since that big GOP takeover in 1994. Back to you guys.
All right, Steve Centani, we thank you very much for joining us live from D.C.
All right, and coming up, we're going to check the legal battles ahead for the Virginia Senate race and a potential recount there. Currently, Allen, I guess, is behind by 8,000 votes. Votes, that is. I can't speak anymore. Anyway, Judge is going to be here to help us sort that one out.
Yes. But right now, joining us from the University of Virginia is Professor Larry Sabato, the founder and director of the University of Virginia Center for Politics. Good morning to you, Doctor, Professor.
Good morning. I'm actually from here, from your D.C. bureau.
Okay.
I haven't been to sleep yet.
Okay, well, thanks for pulling double duty for us today. Now, I'm a big fan of your crystal ball predictions, and let's just recap. According to what we just heard from Steve Centani, the Democrats have picked up 26 seats in the House of Representatives. And Larry Sabato predicted?
Larry Sabato predicted 27.
Whoa.
There you go.
And all the precincts and all the seats are not set yet.
They're exactly not set, and we may be a little under, and I hope some of my emailers understand that. They accused us of being way over what it was going to be, and we just simply try to call them accurately.
Right. Well, what was it you saw going into yesterday, Larry? Because so many of the other national polls said, oh, they might pick up 10 or 12. Why did you see a number double that?
Because we study state by state and district by district. We also predicted, we were, I believe, just about the only analyst to predict, or not just me, but my crystal ball team, predicted +6 Democrats in the Senate, and I think, frankly, despite the closeness of Montana and Virginia, it's going to be +6 Democrats in the Senate. We also predicted +7 governors, Democratic governors. It may be +6. Look, what we do all year long, we're very sick people. We study the districts and the states and the candidates and the races, and I'll tell you how we do it. We do it the hard way. District by district, state by state. We do it individually. We do not determine election predictions from national polls because they're all over the lot.
They are.
They're all over the lot.
You know what, Larry? We interviewed somebody who said a couple weeks ago that this would all come down to who had the most money in their war chest, and they could prove that over time that that's the way it had worked. But you're discounting that.
Absolutely. Look, is money good in politics? Would you rather have more money than less? Of course. But there were tons of people who won yesterday who were outspent 2 to 1 and more. That is not what drives elections solely. Money is one part of it. The cynics tell you it's all about money. Well, I'm not a cynic. I love our system. It's a great system. It has flaws, but as Churchill said many years ago, the worst possible system except for all the others.
Yeah, well, Tip O'Neill said this, all politics is local, but according to the exit polls we were handling at Fox News, 36% only of voters say local matters counted most. 62% voted because they focused on national affairs.
Yeah, this was a nationalized election, Brian. It really was. Look, the truth is, whether the president is right or not on Iraq, the American people are unhappy with his policies, and they voted that. That's what almost always happens in the 6th year of a 2-term presidential election. And we all have discussed this on your show probably 20 times since January, the 6th year election. This was really quite predictable.
Yep, the 6-year itch. All right, Larry, let's look ahead. Now that we can see in our rear view what has happened, what about the Democrats? They've only got a margin on par with what the Republicans have had in the last House. Will they be able to get anything done, or are we just looking at total gridlock again?
I think mainly gridlock, and as you all know, I'm an advocate for gridlock. That old slogan, no man's life, liberty, or property is safe while the legislature is in session, applies. And so, frankly, a Republican president and a Democratic Congress are just not going to agree on very much. Frankly, I don't know that the House and Senate will agree on very much. So you'll have our bicameral system at work, you'll have our presidential veto at work, and it's going to mean less government. Is that really so bad?
Yeah, well, you know, when you want immigration reform, when you want something done about what's happening with energy, when you're tired of things happening in international affairs that we seem powerless to speak in one voice that makes us look weaker as a nation, I think that is bad.
Okay, that's a good counter-argument, but I would simply say that around the world, people understand that Americans are not of one mind and they speak with different voices.
Right.
In the end, Brian, the president has the foreign policy power.
Sure.
He has, for the most part, the war-making power. I don't care what Congress does.
All right, Larry Sabato, we thank you very much. Congratulations on pretty much nailing the election. Could you call me later and just give me the lottery numbers for today while you're at it?
I've already made my bet. I'm not going to share that with you.
Okay,
All right.
and finally, Bears-Giants, real quick.
Larry Sabato, we thank you very much for joining us from our bureau.
Thank you.
Their great website is centerforpolitics.org.
Just a quick reminder to check foxnews.com for all your 2006 election race information. Also coming up on the show.
Missing memory cards and phantom voters. We'll reveal how electronic voting machines performed on Election Day. They were scaring us beforehand. How did it all work?
And with possible legal challenges on the horizon, what will election lawyers target first? Judge Napolitano, who is sleeping on the green room couch right now. That's why I'm whispering. Okay, watching Fox.
Washington, will there be a recount there? And will it happen anytime soon? Hi, Brian.
Well, I have just learned a bit of information that will remind us all of the election of 2000. Look, if it comes down to the Commonwealth of Virginia, if Virginia is the final determiner of who controls the U.S. Senate, and there is a recount, and right now it's increasingly looking as if there will be a recount in Virginia, here's what you need to know. The state law says you can't begin a recount until after the votes have been certified. And the other little tidbit of information that's pertinent here is the votes won't be certified until November 27th. Now, there's a lot of caveats here. Nobody knows what happens when the lawyers get involved. Anything is possible when you take it to the courts. They can make different decisions. But the way it looks to us at this hour is there's going to probably be a recount in Virginia. Virginia could well be the determining factor over whether the Democrats or the Republicans control the U.S. Senate. And according to state law, the way we read it this morning, and I'm not a lawyer, I just play one on TV, it does appear that November 27th is the earliest date that recount could begin. In other words, it's entirely possible we won't know who controls the United States Senate until probably December, if that holds true.
Yeah,
Great.
The other interesting thing, Brian.
Thanks for the good news.
Yeah, the judge is going to be on in just a couple minutes to maybe help us sort out some of the legal questions. But when he was on about 3 hours ago on this show, I think he said that when the votes are not that close, in this case 8,000 votes, that maybe they wouldn't do that much investigating. But I guess we'll have to ask him that question.
Well,
do you know anything more about that?
Remember, we still have a few votes that have not yet been counted in the state of Virginia. In Loudoun County last night, they just got tired and went home and said, we'll finish this up in the morning. So those numbers will be coming around. We don't know exactly how close it's going to be, but generally the sense is in the state of Virginia, we are probably looking at a recount.
Okay, thanks for the good news. Might not know till December.
Glad to be the bearer of good news. Sorry about that.
All right, meanwhile, last week we had Bev Harris on. She's joining us right now from Seattle. She's the director of blackboxvoting.org and the subject of that HBO documentary called Hacking Democracy. Hey, Bev, thanks for getting up so early to be with us today.
Well, thanks a lot.
Well, you know what? Going in, we'd heard these new touchscreen computers and all these new computers. There's a real good chance people can mess with the vote. As it turns out, didn't happen.
How do you know?
Well, where did it happen then?
Well, that's just the point. Nobody knows. You don't know. And in the hack that we did in that special, there's no footprints if somebody did or didn't. One of the things that I think is very interesting is Virginia, because I think there's going to be an issue with the voting machines there that may blow up. There are machines in 30 counties there called WinVote machines, sleepy little company called Advanced Voting Solutions. And reports are pouring in from citizens there indicating that those machines are uncertified and are using various different updates in their software, which is another term for uncertified, don't know what's in the machines, haven't gone through testing. And they're very controversial now. Those machines have already been the subject of one lawsuit in the past where vote shaving was alleged using those systems.
Congressman Ford came out early, Bev, and said that some people were complaining to him that they went in to vote and they were voting for the person they thought, and it would come up the other person. Same with Senator Santorum. And we were getting some calls on yesterday about that same thing, that people were a little disenchanted, but that seems to have been squelched in the aftermath.
Well, the problem is you don't really know what happens until you pull the logs from the machines, and even then you don't necessarily know. But for example, in Palm Beach County, Florida, we had sporadic reports like that in 2004, but when we pulled the logs, we found that in 25% of all the machines there was a problem with vote flipping and calibration. That wasn't reported. It was reported as sporadic problems. So what we want to do next is look at the facts, and the facts come from the actual documentation inside the machines.
Bev, will you be going to Virginia? I mean, since you've sort of made this your mission, will you be going to Virginia?
I'm not sure yet. I've got some really good people there that are doing a lot of the legwork. There's some very interesting situations around the country. I think one of the most interesting ones is in Sarasota, Florida, where citizens decided on their own to put an initiative on the ballot to dump the touchscreens and get paper ballots, and they won.
Interesting.
So that'll be an interesting situation there.
Great. Back to the dimpled
Virginia.
Chad. All right. Bev Harris, we thank you very much. Her HBO documentary is called Hacking Democracy. Thank you, ma'am. All right, straight ahead, don't forget we've got all the state-by-state election results at foxnews.com. Just click on it, and there they all are splayed out for you.
Coming up on Fox and Friends, 2 Senate races that could decide the balance of power still up for grabs. As we've been talking about, the judge is here on the possible legal battles ahead. It's smelling like one in Virginia. You're watching Fox and Friends, the best morning show on television. We will be right back.
Good morning, I'm Lauren Green. In the news, a state of emergency in Oregon as a massive Pacific storm leaves behind up to 15 inches of rain in some areas. More than 100 people were forced to abandon their homes with all major roads shut down in Tillamook County. Meanwhile, Washington state is still recovering from the same storm system. Water levels surged to near record highs. One river actually changed its course, carrying off one home and threatening damage to at least 300 more. One person was killed by the storm. The U.S. ambassador to Iraq assuring the Iraqi people that America's policies won't drastically change as Democrats gain control of the House. He says President Bush sees success in Iraq as imperative for America's national interests. British doctors hope to use stem cells to help heal damage to the heart muscle in heart attack patients. Stem cells are taken from the patient's own bone marrow and injected within hours of a heart attack. 2 London hospitals are testing the procedure. And those are your headlines. Now back to Steve, Gretchen, and Brian.
And the judge, who is joining us right now. All rise. And we're too tired. Thank you very much. Judge, Brian Wilson just had the news that in the state of Virginia, the Commonwealth of Virginia, if there were to be a recount, got to wait to the end of the month to even start after the result. Oh, it's very complicated.
Brian, who claims to play a lawyer on television, is right on the mark. The certification cannot occur under Virginia laws, Brian Wilson said, until the 27th of November, and then you have to request the recount within the 10-day period following that. I think it's unlikely that there will be a recount in Virginia unless that number really, really narrows. It would be very, very hard for Senator Allen to make up 8,000 votes with a recount. Remember, there aren't allegations of impropriety. No. This is not a lawsuit. Right. This is a case of clerks sitting down and retabulating numbers that they've already tabulated.
Unless, and the unless is unless people start coming forward, like we heard early on in Pennsylvania, like we heard early on in Tennessee.
Right. You and I heard yesterday people claiming they voted for Rick Santorum and the X came up next to the name of Bob Casey. If enough people said that, it would have to be thousands, that would be cause for litigation to examine the validity of the ballot, not to add up the numbers in the back of the machine, but to examine how those numbers were tabulated.
And that's different than somebody coming forward and saying, I don't think my vote was counted in the right way.
Right. If someone came forward and said that, a court would dismiss it, and a statewide Board of Election Tabulations, whatever the name of the board is that certifies the elections of Virginia, would dismiss it. That's just too speculative.
Right.
But what Brian and I heard yesterday is not speculative. People actually seeing their vote going for the person against whom they voted.
Yeah, you'd remember that.
Yes.
What about what Bev Harris, who's in the HBO Democracy called Hacking Democracy, what do you think about her suggestion that, you know, in the whole documentary they talk about perhaps it's really easy to hack into a computer, one of the touchscreen things, to change the outcome of the election. And I said, well, we didn't hear about any of that stuff. And she said, well, how would you ever know if it happened? Because it's invisible. There's no footprint.
How do you know that
stealing my luggage?
Right. How do you know the dog did not bark in the middle of the night? I mean, it's the same type of thing. It's so speculative. Courts won't take it into account, and the people on that election board of Virginia won't take it into account. They will only listen to serious, substantiable allegations of fraud.
Montana. What are the Montana rules? What can we expect from there? Do you know?
Montana has the same rule as Virginia about a recount is to be granted if the difference between the two is 1% or less.
Isn't it?
So why are we focusing on? So this could also be happening in Montana, the same situation.
It could. The difference with Montana is they have not finished counting, or have they? It says 100% of the votes.
Look at how close that is now.
All right. Well, that's come up just this morning, and that was at 84% 2 hours ago.
Apparently, computers in Flathead County had failed, and so they started counting them by hand. Also, there was a software problem where they had to reset the computers in Yellowstone County.
Here's what Senator Burns will do, and the same thing as Senator Allen will do. Talk to his precinct people and say, do these numbers seem right to you?
Right.
Can you get me the distance between where I am now and where my opponent is?
Gotcha.
And if the answer is no, 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 they'll throw in the towel. If the answer is yes, they'll go for it.
All right, Judge, you got to go up to your radio mic. You and Brian Kilmeade, starring on Brian and the Judge.
To us today?
Of course, like every day. Thanks, Judge.
Always good to see you, Judge.
All right.
Pleasure.
All right, don't forget FoxNews.com has all the latest information on every race from Election Day 2006. And stick around. You're watching Fox and Friends, the best morning show on TV. We'll be back.
All right. Their color pencils out. Was it you?
What?
Colored pencils.
Colored pencils, the new color of the house.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's more of a great big can of blue paint being dumped on the, as you can see right there, the left side of the aisle. Right now, the balance of power is tilting toward the Democrats. They picked up 27 seats. Meanwhile, the balance of power in the Senate is tenuous. Right now, 2 races hang in the balance in Virginia and also Montana. Both of those races currently too close to call. The Democrats need 2 to win. The Republicans need 1 to keep control.
And you saw how close Montana just got from when we started the show until now. So I think they're going to be, you have to head into a recount there. You owe it to the people who are working for you, let alone the candidate himself.
I got a feeling we're going to be talking about this again tomorrow, same time, same channel. Should we come back?
Same outfits.
I hope not.
Shower.
All right, John Scott, here he is. See you later.
Thank you, Gretchen, and good morning. A new day has begun in Washington. I'm John Scott, and you're looking live at Capitol Hill, where the balance of power has shifted. If you're just waking up and joining us, the Democrats are now in control of the House for the first time in a dozen years. But as of right now, we do not know which party will control the Senate. Democrats picked up 4 of the 6 seats they need to take power in the Senate, but there are still 2 races too close to call. The first in Virginia. Right now, Democrat Jim Webb leads Republican George Allen by about 7,000 votes out of more than 2 million cast. That's a margin of about 1/3 of 1%. That means a recount is very likely. And get this, we are now hearing that the election results won't be certified for 3 weeks, and a recount cannot take place until that certification. So we're at least 3 weeks away from the beginning of a recount in Virginia, assuming that happens. And in Montana, Democrat John Tester is leading in his race against Republican Conrad Burns, but due to technical problems on Election Day, the ballots are still being counted there. Right now, Tester is ahead by only about 1,600 votes. Molly Henneberg is in our Washington newsroom with more on the Senate showdown. Molly?
Hi, John. Virginia and Montana. The GOP needs to hold on to one of them to keep control of the Senate, but the Democratic candidates are leading in both races. In Virginia, Democrat Jim Webb is ahead of incumbent Senator George Allen by 7,800 votes out of 2.3 million cast. Some absentee ballots and votes in a handful of precincts are yet to be added into that total. So Allen is not conceding, and each man is saying those outstanding votes will go his way.
We know there's some more votes out there, some absentee votes and some votes in precincts that traditionally go our way, and we know that when those come in, our margin of victory will be greater.
We're still counting votes. It seems like every time there's a new email, there's some more votes coming in. There's absentee precincts. There are some counties that say that, well, they'll get to counting the ballots later on today.
A recount is not automatic in Virginia. If the margin between the two candidates is less than half of 1%, which it is now, then the trailing candidate can request a recount paid for by the state. But a recount couldn't even begin until after the State Board of Elections meets on November 27th. In Montana, Democrat Jon Tester is ahead of incumbent Senator Conrad Burns by about 1,600 votes. If that margin narrows to about 1,000, it would trigger an automatic recount there. As for the overall Senate picture from last night, Democrats picked up seats, in blue on the map, in Rhode Island, Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Missouri. Republicans were able to hold on to a competitive Senate seat in Tennessee, seen here in red. And as we've been talking about, Virginia and Montana, highlighted in yellow, are yet to be decided. John?
Molly, I guess the obvious question is how many votes are yet to be counted in Montana? Does anybody seem to know that number?
That's what's so interesting is that we're trying to find that out. They're having so many problems because of this new program they had to do last-minute voter registration and also computer problems where now they're having to count ballots by hand and they're not sure. It's going to be a couple of hours before we find out how many more to be counted and what the final tally is.
And again, the margin separating the two candidates about 1,600 votes. Jon Tester leads Conrad Burns, the Republican incumbent.
Yes, that's right, 1,600 votes. And if it goes down to 1,000, around 1,000, it triggers an automatic recount.
Molly Henneberg live in Washington. Thanks. President Bush plans to hold a news conference 1 p.m. Eastern Time, 4 hours from now. The president's already been working the phones this morning, calling House Speaker Dennis Hastert to thank him for his hard work, and Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi, the incoming Speaker of the House, or so it would seem, to offer his congratulations to her. Once again, President Bush will hold a news conference 4 hours from now. You can see it live right here on Fox. So Democrats coming close to their goal of taking both houses of Congress if they win the Senate. Some hard-fought races in the Northeast and Midwest will be part of their margin. In Bellwether State, Missouri, State Auditor Claire McCaskill beat incumbent Senator Jim Talent in a race with embryonic stem cell research as a major issue. In Rhode Island, former Attorney General Sheldon Whitehouse beat popular moderate Republican Lincoln Chafee. Chafee's well-known family name unable to win enough votes to take that state. Seven-term Ohio Congressman Sherrod Brown is now Senator-elect Sherrod Brown. He beat Senator Mike DeWine, the Republican incumbent. Brown voted against the 2002 resolution to authorize war in Iraq and has constantly criticized White House policy. In Pennsylvania, conservative Democrat Bob Casey won by a big margin over Rick Santorum, the number 3 senator in the Republican leadership. Casey is an anti-abortion, pro-gun Democrat who supports federal limits on funding embryonic stem cell research. And in the Senate, the seats in Maryland and New Jersey stay in Democratic hands. Congressman Ben Cardin defeated Lieutenant Governor Michael Steele, and Senator Bob Menendez held off a strong challenge from Republican Tom Kean Jr. Menendez had been viewed as the most vulnerable of 17 Senate Democratic incumbents. One of the most closely watched Senate races, Bill Frist's seat in Tennessee. Democratic Congressman Harold Ford Jr. versus Republican Bob Corker. This race seesawed back and forth. Both parties poured cash into the volunteer state, but in the end, the Republican came out on top. The numbers are on your screen right now. Corker with about 51% of the vote. Ford with 48%. Early this morning, Ford stepped on stage and spoke to his supporters.
These moments are moments you can either shrink from or grow from. And I have to tell you that I'm going to pray and ask my good Lord and Savior to give me the strength and the wisdom and the ability to grow and to not only be a better person, but to be a better servant from it. I say to my opponent tonight, congratulations to you and your family.
Harold Ford's opponent, Senator-elect Bob Corker, joins us now. Senator-elect, yours was one of the few bright spots for Republicans last night. Why did you win?
I think it boiled down to a choice between two individuals that had very, very different backgrounds and a different view of what made our country stronger and safer. But I just want to say my opponent ran a great race. He's obviously a very talented individual, and I feel very fortunate to have won. I want to thank all the people in the state of Tennessee and friends around the country who came in to help me in this race. It is quite an honor, and I look forward to bringing people together in the state of Tennessee. It's been a tough, tough race, really to work together to solve our country's most pressing issues.
Well, and the landscape that you're going to be entering when you get to Washington is much different than Republicans might have expected even a couple of months ago. Democrats win control of the House of Representatives. Still too early to say about the Senate. Is that going to change the way you do business?
No, I told the people of the state what I was going to do as a United States Senator. I do understand that I'm a freshman class of one on our side, and look forward to seeing what the outcome is in the two races right now that are up in the air. But look, I've been the same person all the way through. I'm going to do my best to bring people together to work to solve the problems that our country faces, and that's why I ran for the United States Senate. And whether we're in the majority or the minority, that's what I'm going to do. And all my life, look, I'm a builder. I've been somebody who has been able to bring people together to make good things happen. I look forward to working with people on both sides of the aisle to address our country's issues, and feel it quite an honor to be elected, especially in this environment.
Well, Senator-elect Corker, sounds like you don't have a great deal of voice left. We'll let you rest it. Thanks very much for being with us.
Thank you very much.
Control of the U.S. House of Representatives changes hands after more than a decade of Republican rule. The new leadership saying it is committed to bipartisanship and that reform begins today. Steve Centani has a look at that live from Washington. Steve.
John, a decisive win for Democrats in the House. They only needed 15 seats to regain control, and they won at least 27, and there could be more before it's all over. That means California Congresswoman Nancy Pelosi is almost sure to become the first woman to serve as Speaker of the House. Last night, she hailed the Democrats' big win as a vote for a change of direction, especially in Iraq, where she says the president's policy is a catastrophic path. She says stay the course has not made America safer. But in spite of the big divide between Republicans and Democrats on the Iraq war issue and many others, Pelosi promised a bipartisan approach to House leadership.
We are prepared to govern, and we will do so working together with the administration and the Republicans in Congress in partnership, not in partisanship.
Now, Pelosi has said her first priorities will be to raise the minimum wage, provide a better prescription drug program for seniors, and scrap the federal ban on stem cell research. Republicans expected the House to change hands and are offering mixed reactions this morning. Here's Republican National Committee Chairman Ken Millman.
I think the American people clearly sent a message, and it's a message we need to understand and we need to listen to, and we as Republicans need to follow.
Now, President Bush called Nancy Pelosi today and offered his congratulations. He also thanked outgoing Speaker Dennis Hastert and told him we'll all work together. John?
All right, Steve Centani, live in Washington. Thanks. There were two races getting special attention last night because of political scandals. One of them, the seat vacated by disgraced former Republican Congressman Mark Foley. The 12-year incumbent stepped down after a scandal involving underage pages in September. Last night, Tim Mahoney beat out Republican Joe Negron, becoming the first Democrat elected to Florida's 16th district in 30 years. And former House Majority Leader Tom DeLay's old seat also went to a Democrat. Nick Lamson ousted Republican write-in candidate Shelley Sekula Gibbs by almost 13%. Lamson's victory marks the first time a Democrat will represent that district in more than 2 decades. The House of Representatives now in the hands of Democrats. Nancy Pelosi on track to become the new House Speaker. It's all but a foregone conclusion. So what's that going to mean for you? We'll talk about that. And after 80 million votes are cast, the Webb-Allen race, I'm sorry, that can't be, we got a typo there. 8 million votes cast. The Webb-Allen race and control of the Senate could come down to a couple of thousand voters in the Commonwealth of Virginia. The latest straight ahead on Fox News Channel. Political coverage, fair and balanced.
We all go out, we vote, we argue, we vote. But also, we'd like to say that the votes are in and we won.
I know the counting will continue through the night. It'll continue tomorrow. And I want to thank you all, because I know you're going to be like a bunch of eagles and hawks watching how every one of these votes are accurately counted.
They're going to vote for change, not the status quo. And I think because of that, I think we could win as many as 30-plus seats gain in the House of Representatives.
They talk about how the country wants change, but they fail to say what their change would be. I think on Election Day, people vote for people with ideas rather than people without ideas. I think that's why these polls have gotten so close in the last 4 days.
Roy Blunt there, and before him, House Minority Whip Steny Hoyer on Fox News Live just about 24 hours ago. The congressman confidently predicting Democrats would win and win big in the House. The prediction was 30-40. The actual number right now, 27 seats picked up by Democrats. His prediction not far off. Congressman Hoyer joins us once again this morning. Congressman Hoyer, it's my understanding the president called you this morning. What did he have to say?
He did call. He congratulated me and he congratulated the Democrats on their victory. And he said he wanted to work together. And I responded that both Nancy Pelosi and I had said that we wanted to work together to confront the challenges of our country. We think that's what the American people want. They voted for change, not necessarily partisan confrontation. And we're prepared to do that. And if the president wants to meet us halfway, we certainly are going to meet him halfway. And we want to reach across the aisle as well. And say to our colleagues in the House, let us put behind us this partisanship, this confrontation, and solve problems. That's what America wants us to do.
Many Democrats have said that this election was really about President Bush and changing the direction of the country. If that's the case, doesn't that mean that there is going to be legislative gridlock on programs that the president wants that the Democratic majority in the House and maybe the Senate doesn't?
Well, you know, I hope not. Clearly, we have an example. The Reagan administration with a Democratic House worked together both on Social Security reform, on tax reform, on other issues. Were there differences? Clearly there were some significant differences, but there was also a coming together and working on behalf of the American public and our country. I presume that President Bush, I give him the benefit of the doubt. I think he wants to do that. As he said he wants to do that. We're prepared to do that. So I hope that we're not going to have gridlock. The American public doesn't want gridlock. They voted for change. We're going to work together for change.
So what's priority one in the House under Nancy Pelosi?
Well, priority is our, as you know, in the first 100 hours of the session, we're going to address a number of issues. First of all, real security, the implementation of the 9/11 Commission report, which has not been done at this point in time. We're going to address jobs. We're going to address minimum wage, make sure that people working for the minimum wage and working 40 hours a week are not living in poverty in America. We're going to address college expenses. They've been escalating at over 50% in most states in the nation. We need to make sure that young people and working families have access for themselves and their children to college. We want to start addressing energy independence. That's a national security problem, it's an economic problem, and it's certainly an environmental issue. And in addition to that, we're very concerned about 46 million Americans being uninsured, not having a way to get into the health care system. We need an accessible, affordable health care system. We're going to address prescription drugs. We're going to address the donut hole. We're going to address the ability to negotiate prices when we buy large amounts of drugs. That will save money for our senior citizens. Then we're going to address Social Security, and we're going to make sure it's a guarantee, not a gamble. We're going to address pension stability so that we won't see Enron's stealing people's pensions and putting them in poverty.
That's an awfully long and ambitious list. One thing I didn't hear in that list, illegal immigration. Is that something that the Democratic leadership will be addressing?
I am sure that we're going to be working with the president and with our colleagues across the aisle. The Republicans could not come to agreement on that. They were deeply divided on that issue, and as a result, we took no action on immigration in the last session. I am confident that we will work together with the President. It's an issue of great importance. We're all for border security. I think that's not a contentious issue. We want to make sure that our borders are secure and that we know who's coming into this country. We need to do that for national security purposes, and frankly, we need to do it so we don't get overwhelmed on our social services agenda for our own people. Now, having said that, there is the issue that the President has raised, essentially agreed with the Senate, and we think the House can come to agreement with the President and the Senate on this issue.
Steny Hoyer expected to be the majority whip in this new Congress. Thanks very much for being with us.
Thank you very much.
So the likely new Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, expected to give a news conference coming up a little bit later this morning. We will bring that to you live. And if you're just joining us, we're still waiting on results from two states, Montana and Virginia. Democrats in the lead in the Senate races in both states, but just barely. So what's next? This morning that while the Republicans deserve to lose the majority, in the paper's words, the Democrats didn't necessarily deserve to win it. Joining us now, Chris Hennick, former Deputy Assistant to President George W. Bush, and Stephanie Cutter, Democratic strategist and former Communications Director for Kerry Edwards. Stephanie, I'm guessing you would take issue with what the Washington Post has to say.
Oh, absolutely. I think by any measure, the American people came out and spoke against the Bush Republican policies of the last 6 years and for something better, a way forward in this country, and that's finding a way out of Iraq, raising the minimum wage, energy independence, college affordability, all of the issues that Democrats have been fighting for. It's just not a referendum against President Bush, but it's a call for change towards something.
Chris, was this a referendum on President Bush? Is that why Republicans got tossed out in the House?
Well, it's clearly a Democratic election, but what's important to analyze and understand this morning is what a Democratic vote meant yesterday. Your own Fox News Opinion Dynamics poll asked, what is the reason to vote for Democrats? And the two questions were, do you agree with the policies of the Democratic Party? That was 10%. And do you want change of leadership, which was 65%, a full 50% difference. And what was leading that change on the exit polls of most important reason was corruption, terrorism, the economy, and Iraq. So most people are certainly, Iraq was certainly a common denominator throughout all these elections, but the corruption and the exasperation that voters had on Congress was more the driving factor than anything. And I never thought I'd agree with the Washington Post the morning after the election, as a Republican as well, too.
Well, so does that mean, Chris, that you feel Republicans really shot themselves in the foot this election?
Well, it really drives to the point of the issues still were the same, but and a lot of times they forgot their moorings, they forgot why they were there. That's why I'm really encouraged by a lot of new leaders like Adam Putman from Florida, as well as Senator John Sununu. I think you'll see Senator Martinez, Senator Norm Coleman, a lot of these newer faces with the Republican Party. You'll see a lot of changes on issues of certainly spending and going back to our core principles. So I think Republicans are going to be encouraged by a lot of this change and what we get. We hear from the voters, and we need to change.
Stephanie, how long a period of time do Democrats have to really get some things done, get some of those issues that you say Americans want passed? How long do they have to achieve that before, you know, there could be another house cleaning in Washington?
Oh, I don't think we should get ahead of ourselves here. The final results aren't even in. And when the final results are in, it's not a matter of how much Democrats won, but about by what margin. And that margin is going to be a significant statement for Democratic principles. And the President hasn't even spoken yet. He's speaking at 1 o'clock today. He needs to come forward and say he wants a new era of bipartisanship, like Leader Pelosi and Leader Reid did last night. He's been governing from the far right. Our leaders are governing from the center. And that's where we need to move forward. I mean, the American people spoke loud and clear last night for a raise in the minimum wage.
Governing from the center, Nancy Pelosi has generally been on the left side of the party. Is she going to shift?
Look at the things that we've been fighting for. Is a raise in the minimum wage liberal or conservative? It's just the right thing to do. Finding a way out of Iraq, it's not liberal or conservative. It's the right thing to do.
Okay.
We can talk about party politics, or we could talk about moving America forward. And the only people talking about moving America forward, it seems, are Democrats.
Stephanie.
We've called for a new era of bipartisanship, and I think we need to find a way to make it work. The American people want Washington to start working for them.
Stephanie Cutter and Chris Hennick, we have to say goodbye. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, we're ready to call another congressional race. Seven-term Congressman Richard Pombo goes down to defeat in Tracy, California. Democratic challenger Jerry McNerney picks up a key California district in the Central Valley, the 11th Congressional District. Another loss of one seat for Republicans. House Democrats, of course, are celebrating today. They are divvying up new leadership posts that they haven't held in 12 years. By the way, a minute ago, we identified Steny Hoyer as the likely new majority whip. He's actually in line to be the new majority leader. A lot of changes to get used to here. We analyze what they want to do and what they can and cannot accomplish. Take a live look at the Capitol building. President Bush is planning to hold a news conference about the change in direction that seems to have taken place there. The president's been working the phones this morning. He has already called House Speaker Dennis Hastert, a guy who has that title for only a couple of more months. Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi, we hear that the president offered her his congratulations when he made a phone call to her this morning. Once again, President Bush planning a news conference about 3.5 hours from now, 1 o'clock Eastern Time. You can see it live right here on Fox.
The donkeys take at least the House. Will the Bears rule on Wall Street? Good morning, everyone. I'm Daga McDowell with your morning market report. The House back in the hands of the Democrats, but control of the Senate's still up in the air. And that uncertainty, one thing weighing on Wall Street this morning. Stock set for a lower open, and the opening bell rang about a minute and a half ago. Investors typically do not like the unknown or the unexpected. And Democrat domination of the House and Senate would be unexpected. Over the last several weeks, the markets factored in the likelihood that the Democrats would win back the House, with the Republicans keeping the Senate. The thinking there, gridlock is good. One party will keep the other in check and keep a lid on government spending and regulation. But many investors were not banking on the Democrats taking the Senate as well. Total congressional control could mean headaches for some industries. The Democrats could target oil companies with windfall profit taxes. Drug companies would feel a pinch if Uncle Sam starts negotiating drug prices for Medicare. Two sectors to keep an eye on today. And Wall Street might wonder what could happen to the president's tax cuts before they expire in 2010. However, history shows that the Dow's delivered about the same performance with the Republican president and a split Congress, or one totally dominated by the Democrats, a modest gain of nearly 7%. But out of the possible outcomes yesterday, the returns in the past have been the best when the GOP has controlled both the White House and Capitol Hill. So let's see who is in control on Wall Street this morning. Clearly the bears are out, the bulls taking cover. The Dow is down 38 points, and you're seeing red arrows for the NASDAQ and S&P as well. And be sure to watch Your World with Neil Cavuto today at 4 Eastern. Is Charlie Rangel now the most powerful money man in D.C.? Well, Neil talks to the congressman at 4. And this weekend, you cannot miss the Cost of Freedom. Saturday morning, we'll break down the entire election and figure out what it means to your money. That is Saturday morning at 10 a.m. Eastern. And you can always check out foxbusiness.com. I'm Daga McDowell.
And this is a Fox News alert. I'm Lauren Green. The military wing of Hamas now calling on Muslims to attack Americans. That call coming after Israeli artillery killed 18 Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. The Palestinian president is asking the UN to intervene to stop the fighting that has dragged on since June. Mike Tobin is live on the Israel-Gaza border. Mike?
Hello, Lauren. It has been another deadly inflammatory day in the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians. This after Israel pulled troops and armor out of Bet Hanun, the little Palestinian town which is behind me. After the Israeli troops and armor were out, they sent artillery and/or tank fire back in. The stated goal of that fire was to stop Palestinians from firing their homemade Qassam rockets out of the Gaza Strip at Israeli targets. The result was that a civilian structure was hit. 18 Palestinians killed in their sleep. 13 of them them said to be from the same family, 7 of them children, all of them civilians. Demonstrations sprung up across the West Bank and Gaza. Demonstrators called for revenge. Leaders of Hamas promised to continue the rocket fire. Several more rockets were fired today. The militant wing of Hamas promised to reactivate martyrs, which you can interpret at this point to be suicide bombers. They promised to strike deep inside Israel. As a consequence, the terror alert level inside of Israel was raised. And for the first time, the militant wing of Hamas departed from its old practice of focusing only on Israeli target. They issued a statement calling for Muslims worldwide to hit American targets, and this is because of America's support for Israel. Lauren, back to you in New York.
All right, thank you very much, Mike Tobin. And other news turning now to the war on terror in Iraq. Iraqi police say mortar rounds land on a soccer field in Baghdad's Shiite neighborhood of Sadr City, killing 7 people. And the military says a U.S. Marine is the 20th American killed in Iraq so far this month. The Marine died fighting in Anbar province. Elsewhere in Baghdad, more sectarian violence. Police say 1 car bomb killed a civilian and wounded 6 others. And a homicide car bomber set off explosives near a convoy of Iraqi commandos, killing 1 soldier and wounding 3 others. In a third attack, 3 civilians were killed by mortar shells in central Baghdad. Police say 13 other people were wounded. Miami police are searching for the killer or killers of a University of Miami player. Defensive lineman Brian Pata was found shot in the head at an off-campus apartment complex. Police are calling it a homicide. Police were called to the scene by a 911 call last night and found Pata's body. No word yet who made the call. Pata lived about 4 miles from the university campus. And singer Britney Spears looking to end her 2nd marriage. The pop princess has filed for divorce from her husband, Kevin Federline. Divorce papers cite irreconcilable differences. Spears and Federline have 2 children, a 1-year-old and an infant born in September. And those are some of the stories Fox is following. I'm Lauren Green.
A Fox News alert. Florida Senator Bill Nelson coasted to an easy victory last night, and his son Charles may have indulged in a little bit too much celebration. He was arrested and charged with battery on a law enforcement officer, disorderly intoxication, and resisting arrest without violence. This is the mugshot of Charles Nelson, Florida Senator Bill Nelson's son, again arrested last night and charged with battery on a law enforcement officer and disorderly intoxication, also resisting arrest without violence. We'll try and get more information about exactly what transpired there in Florida a little bit later on Fox.
We really care about taking our country back, about giving, about changing the course in Iraq, overseas, about helping average people pay the bills, the tuition bills and the prescription drug bills and the health care bills and the energy bills. And that is why we are so passionate and so concerned about this election. We want to...
New York Senator Charles Schumer there speaking about the election and what his Democratic Party hopes to accomplish with a new majority in the House of Representatives. So specifically, what is on the Democrats' agenda right now? Jim Angle live in Washington with more on that. Jim.
Hello, John. Well, there were lots of issues in the campaign, as you heard, but the Democratic leader in the House pointed to one in particular.
Nowhere did the American people make it more clear that we need a new direction than in the war in Iraq. Stay the course has not made our country safer, has not honored our commitment to our troops, and has not made the region more stable.
Though Democrats were uniformly critical of the situation in Iraq, as were many Republicans, Democrats are deeply divided over exactly what to do. Many of the leaders of the party have said the consensus position was a small withdrawal at the end of this year, but no timelines or deadlines after that. But John Murtha, who is running for majority leader, wants withdrawal as soon as possible. So the exact mandate for change is not clear.
Mandate for what? I mean, the Democrats don't have a definitive plan, so I don't know that anyone would argue that it's a mandate. I think the dilemma here for the voters is they see what's going on in Iraq, and there's a gut feeling, common sense feeling among the public that just things are a mess, things aren't going well, and that there needs to be a change of direction.
But many Democrats think the change in direction is to be more successful by changing tactics, maybe even dividing the country into 3 affiliated parts. But many are strongly against rapid withdrawal, saying that would be a disaster. The Democrats also have a long list of domestic goals, including an increase in the minimum wage, but many states have already taken care of that. 6 states voted last night to raise the state minimum wage above the federal level of $5.15 an hour, joining 23 other states which have already done so. John?
Jim Engel live in Washington. Thank you. Stopping the government from taking your land. In 9 states, voters approved measures to restrict eminent domain last night. Arizona, Florida, Georgia, Michigan, North Dakota, New Hampshire, Nevada, Oregon, and South Carolina all passed referendums on eminent domain, barring or restricting the government from seizing private property. A similar measure was defeated in Idaho. It also was shot down in California. Hillary Clinton wins a new term in the Senate, laying the groundwork perhaps for a presidential run 2 years from now. Rick Leventhal is live on Long Island with a look at that. Rick?
And John, Hillary Rodham Clinton expected to arrive here at the Airport Diner in Bohemia on Long Island sometime in the next hour or so. It's the second of 7 stops she'll be making across the state to thank voters and supporters for her overwhelming victory. Mrs. Clinton winning 67% of the vote, 2/3 of the vote against her Republican opponent John Spencer, even in traditionally Republican areas. Mrs. Clinton's first stop this morning was a New York City firehouse on 8th Avenue in Midtown, where she had breakfast and thanked first responders for their dedication and hard work. She's come a long way in 6 years. Back in 2000, she was a recently former First Lady, making a quick move to New York to capture a vacant Senate seat with a high-profile campaign, promising voters at the time that she would serve her full 6-year term, despite rumors that she had her eye on higher office. And this time around, no guarantees and more rumors of a presidential run. In fact, she spent almost $30 million on a race that was never in doubt, more than any other candidate in the country. And last night at the Democratic Victory Party, she made several references to New Yorkers and Americans coming together as a state and a country while taking shots at the current administration.
The Vice President said, regardless of the outcome, the administration would go full speed ahead in the same direction. Well, I think that the American people have said, not so fast.
And again, we expect to hear more from Mrs. Clinton when she arrives here at this diner sometime in the next hour or so, and then she gets on a jet and flies to Binghamton, Buffalo, Syracuse, Rochester, and Albany, beginning her second term in the Senate and possibly, John, her first personal run for the White House.
Rick Leventhal reporting live. Thank you. Let's take you to California now. Voters there overwhelmingly approved a ballot initiative that will dramatically restrict where sexual predators are allowed to live. That measure is called Proposition 83. It prevents registered sex offenders from living within 2,000 feet of a school or a park, which effectively prevents them from living in many of California's cities. Prop 83 is known as Jessica's Law, named for Jessica Lunsford, the 9-year-old Florida girl who was kidnapped, raped, and murdered by a convicted sex offender last year. And traditional values winning out with voters when it came to the marriage amendment. 8 states voted on amendments to ban gay marriage. Voters in Colorado, Idaho, South Carolina, South Dakota, Tennessee, Virginia, and Wisconsin approved constitutional amendments banning same-sex marriages. Arizona rejected the referendum. Arizona did pass some tough new rules for illegal immigrants. We're going to talk about those a little bit later on. And this is a mugshot that Florida Senator Bill Nelson would probably rather not see. This is his son, Charles Nelson, who was arrested last night and charged with battery on a law enforcement officer, disorderly intoxication, and resisting arrest without violence. Apparently a little too much celebrating after Florida Senator Bill Nelson won easy re-election last night.
Houses are flying.
Now we have a little more information on what apparently happened in Orlando, Florida last night when the son of Florida Senator Bill Nelson was arrested. Around 2:40 a.m., Charles Wilson was apparently seen involved in a fight. About 20 people involved in this fight. The police say they found Charles Nelson arguing with an unidentified man attempting to take an unconscious woman to a hotel. When Nelson heard that paramedics would be arriving to assist this woman, we're told that he pushed the officers and tried to drag the woman onto the hotel. When an officer told Nelson to put the woman down, he dropped her on the ground and refused to leave. He wound up getting sprayed with pepper spray. He was also charged with battery of a law enforcement officer, disorderly intoxication, and resisting arrest without violence. Once again, Charles Nelson involved in an altercation last night. His father, Florida Senator Bill Nelson, just won re-election to the United States Senate. South Dakota voters reject a controversial measure banning all abortions except to save a woman's life. Opponents of the ban, 55% to the supporters, 45%. Governor Mike Rounds signed the bill into law in March, but critics say it was too harsh because it did not include exceptions for rape and incest. To the west now, another place where Democrats picked up some key seats. Energy and immigration said to be two deciding factors there for candidates and referendums. And the loss of a 7-term GOP incumbent, a major defeat for Republicans. William LaJeunesse is live with a look at those results from Los Angeles. William?
Well, John, this is actually a list of 17 of the losing House Republicans. Every one of them had voted for the fence-only immigration bill in the House. And while it is probably too early to draw conclusions about policy, it does appear that with these House Republicans out of the way, the president may get his way on the immigration bill, a guest worker plan that does not require illegals already here to go home. But Arizona voters, they are on the front lines of the border battle. They sent kind of a mixed message. They approved 3 propositions prohibiting illegal immigrants from receiving bail, punitive damages in a civil suit, or in-state college tuition and almost any form of government aid. And yet they threw out one of the leading voices against illegal immigration, J.D. Hayworth. Hayworth is a polarizing figure. The Arizona Republic called him a bully. Hayworth had a 15-point lead until Democrats targeted his race. Instead, voters elected moderate Harry Mitchell, an ex-mayor of Tempe. He, like John McCain, favors a guest worker bill and a path to citizenship for illegals already here.
I think people are just plain wanting a new direction. I think they're tired of the way things are going in Washington, and they believe that we ought to be have some new priorities.
Now, California posted almost a dozen ballot propositions, including a $4 billion tax on domestic oil production, and then giving that money to alternative energy. Ex-President Clinton and Al Gore supported it, but voters did not. They rejected it, as well as a tax on cigarettes, parental consent for minors on abortions, and public financing of campaigns. But voters approved an initiative requiring sex offenders to wear a GPS ankle bracelet for life. And finally, John, I will say that Governor Schwarzenegger won here. He has a press conference later today. He is going down to Mexico for a 2-day trade mission, and many are now speculating that he will take on Barbara Boxer in 2010. Back to you.
Interesting. William LaJeunesse, thank you. Going to take a live look at the White House now. President Bush expected to speak to the nation about the election results. That at 1 p.m. Eastern. Once again, you're looking live at the White House. President Bush will hold a news conference about 4 hours from now. Make that 3 hours from now, about 1 p.m. Eastern time. This after his party, the Republicans, lost control of the House of Representatives. The president pledges to work with Democrats on major issues, including the war on terror and building the growing economy. Joining us now, Mike Allen. He is the White House correspondent for Time magazine. You were part, Mike, of that article on the Lone Ranger. The president sort of going it alone in many ways in politics. He's going to feel a little bit more alone now with his party having lost control of the House.
Well, happy post-birthday, John. And you don't think he's going to be best friends with the incoming Speaker, Nancy Pelosi?
Well, he's going to have to be, isn't he?
Yeah, he definitely plans to work on it, John. John, as your viewers are in the Perkins this morning, eating their pancakes, looking at the returns, if you're in Bozeman, praying for a miracle in that Senate race, you're wondering how is the president going to play this? And John, I can tell you, the president is going to act on this as an opportunity, not as a defeat. beginning in the Rose Garden today, you're going to see the president taking a surprisingly conciliatory point of view, saying to Democrats that he wants to start up front by working on issues where either they have shared interests or even where they agree to try to get something done. The model that his aides are using for this is the president's approach when he was in Texas, when because of the Democratic domination of the legislature, he had to work with them. And the president had a very productive and even jocular relationship with the legislators there. Now, I don't think you'll find him palling around with Democrats in the House quite the way he did in Senate, but they say that this is a model for a way to get something done. Because, John, there's no question that what happened yesterday is a crushing personal defeat for the people in the White House. But they worked hard to get here, and they don't want to see it a smoking wreckage in January 2009.
Well, at the White House, are they attributing this defeat in the House to some of the president's policies, or is it all about the behavior of some Republicans in Congress? And I'm talking about people like Mark Foley, Tom DeLay, the Abramoff scandal.
Well, John, it was certainly both. And a person who's close to the president said to me that when you become arrogant, when you don't act the way that your constituents want to, you're eventually going to lose. It's political Darwinism. And so there is some of that. I think that they feel that some of these members ran bad campaigns. But, John, the data are clear. Voters said that they wanted to change. Voters were unhappy when they went to the polls. And I think you're going to hear the president acknowledge that and have the president talk about what he's going to try to do with Democrats to address the concerns that people have. There's no question the president wants to be succeeded by a Republican. If he's not, it'll be written as a rejection of him. So the Republican brand remains very important to him, not only for his legacy, but also, John, because as you know, his family, all their lives have worked to help build the Republican Party.
All right. Mike Allen, Time Magazine, thanks very much.
Have a beautiful week, John.
Thank you. Once again, this is the official police mugshot of Charles William Nelson, the son of Florida Senator Bill Nelson. Apparently, he'd been out celebrating his father's victory last night in the Florida Senate race when he wound up in a group of about 20 people arguing and fighting. When police got there, they found him dragging a woman to a hotel. She was said to be unconscious. When he was told paramedics would be coming to help her out, he dropped her on the ground, pushed officers, and refused to leave. He is now charged with 3 felonies: battery of a law enforcement officer, disorderly intoxication, and resisting arrest without violence. We'll keep you updated ahead on Fox. Good morning. It's 10 a.m. in Washington, and it's a whole new ball game there. The balance of power has changed. I'm John Scott. President Bush plans a news conference just about 3 hours from now. We expect to find out his reaction to what's happening on Capitol Hill, where Democrats are now in charge of the House for the first time in 12 years. As of right now, we can't tell you which party is going to run the Senate. Democrats have picked up 4 of the 6 seats they need for control, but 2 races are still too close to call. In Virginia, Democrat Jim Webb leads Republican George Allen by about 7,000 votes. Webb is already claiming victory, but Allen is not conceding. We just got word that he will hold an 11:30 news briefing in Richmond. We will try to bring that to you live. In Montana, a tight race grows tighter by the hour. Democrat John Tester is ahead of Republican Conrad Burns, but only by about 1,700 votes, and ballots are still being counted. There are all kinds of balloting problems in Montana. Molly Henneberg is covering the Senate showdown for us. From Washington, she brings us a live update. Molly.
Hi, John. Based on election results, it's tied up in the Senate for now. Republicans have 49 seats, Democrats and independents 49 seats. 2 seats are up for grabs, Virginia and Montana. The Democratic candidates are leading in both states. In Virginia, Democrat Jim Webb is ahead of incumbent Senator George Allen by 7,800 votes out of 2.3 million cast. Still to be counted are votes in a handful of precincts and some absentee ballots. Allen says he's still in the race. Webb is claiming victory.
We all go out, we vote, we argue, we vote. But also would like to say that the votes are in and we won.
I know the counting will continue through the night. It'll continue tomorrow. And I want to thank you all because I know you're going to be like a bunch of eagles and hawks watching how every one of these votes are accurately counted.
A recount is not automatic in Virginia. If the margin is less than half of 1%, which it is now, then the trailing candidate can request a recount paid for by the state. But a recount could not even begin until after the State Board of Elections meets on November 27th. In Montana, Democrat Jon Tester is ahead of incumbent Senator Conrad Burns by about 1,700 votes. If that gap narrows to about 1,000 votes, it would fall within the margin of a recount there. As for the overall Senate picture from last night, Democrats picked up seats in blue in Rhode Island, Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Missouri. Republicans were able to hold on to a competitive Senate seat in Tennessee, seen here in red. And Virginia and Montana, highlighted in yellow, are yet to be decided. Republicans need to hold on to one of those states, Virginia or Montana, to keep control of the Senate. John?
All right, Molly Henneberg live from Washington. Thanks very much. So it has been an interesting 24 hours. Edie Hill joins us now, and the senator from your home state of Connecticut, Joe Lieberman, takes on a whole new importance in this new balance of power.
Well, actually, you're right. The senator from my state, though, Kay Bailey Hutchison, won re-election. Coming up in our program, we're going to have actually my local representative from Dripping Springs. Typical Texas politics. There was a fist fight outside the Baptist church.
Whoa!
So we'll tell you about that. But Joe Lieberman up in Connecticut, you know, how would you feel if you have been really one of the top guns in your group, whatever it is, your company, your group of friends, whatever, and they all of a sudden turn on you? Would you go back to them with open arms?
Well, it's going to be interesting, like I said, to see what happens when he gets back to Washington.
It was feisty there. Meanwhile, the House of Representatives in Democratic hands, and the new speaker is a liberal Democrat. She's also a woman for the first time in American history, a woman leading the House.
We are prepared to govern, and we will do so working together with the administration and the Republicans in Congress in partnership, not in partisanship.
Well, how do you accomplish that? Steve Centani is live in Washington. Steve, will that be an easy feat, or very contentious?
It might be a little bit difficult, but of course, the Democrats now in charge of the House, so they can decide who's the head of all the committees and set the agenda there. But then, of course, they clash with the White House on some issues. Democrats promising bipartisanship, Republicans looking ahead to the next election after this dramatic shift in the balance of power here in Washington. Here's the lay of the land for the House of Representatives right now. After Democrats picked up at least 27 seats in Tuesday's election, and probably more before it's all over, they only needed 15 to gain control, so they're well over that. That means the next Speaker of the House is very likely to be a liberal Democrat from San Francisco, as you said, Nancy Pelosi. Now, she's the first woman ever to hold that job. She promised an open, honest, and ethical Congress last night. That, of course, a clear reference to the scandals that have rocked Capitol Hill. And she said Americans voted for a change of direction on Tuesday. The architect of the Democratic House win is Congressman Rahm Emanuel.
We laid out, I think, a very succinct strategy to nationalize an election around the new direction and around change, because the American people wanted change. They were very upset with, after 6 years of what I refer to as the endless occupation in Iraq and the wageless recovery here in America. And Democrats offered an alternative that the American people wanted to embrace.
Now, Republicans are looking forward to the next election and promising to work with the Democratic majority. Here's the postmortem from Tom DeLay, the former Republican leader in the House.
I think when you forget your principles and you play not to lose, you lose. The Republicans took a real Texas whipping last night, and we need to regroup and stand on principle.
Now, the president called the future Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, this morning to congratulate her. Pelosi's planning a noontime news conference to talk about her plans. That's about 2 hours from now, and Fox News will carry it live. John?
All right, Steve Centani live in Washington. Thank you. Initiatives aimed at putting more money in the pockets of low-income workers pass in 6 states. Voters approved minimum wage hikes in Arizona, Colorado, Montana, Nevada, Ohio, And in Missouri, the new minimum wage increases take effect on January 1st.
You know, John, I don't know if you thought this was as interesting as I did, because, you know, many Democrats were elected to office, but it's almost like they didn't get the capital, political capital, but more like a line of credit, because so many of the socially conservative voter initiatives passed, like in Arizona. Voters there taking a hard line with illegal immigrants. 4 new propositions, all passing in the state, believed to have the largest illegal immigrant population. Proposition 300, promising an immediate impact. And now it effectively blocks illegal immigrants from accessing several taxpayer-funded programs. And that includes a lot of forms of the adult education and child care. And then there are propositions 100, 102, and 103. They do a number of things. 1 denies bail for illegals suspected of committing serious crimes. Another prohibits illegals from getting punitive damages in civil suits. And the last makes English the official language of Arizona. Yet one of the conservative Republicans on those issues was voted out of office.
Yeah, go figure. To Missouri now, where voters have narrowly approved an amendment to the state constitution that protects stem cell research, even involving the use of human embryos. The amendment received national attention after that controversial ad starring Michael J. Fox hit the airwaves. The amendment also featured prominently in the Missouri Senate race. Take a look at the final numbers. The margin of victory, about 45,000 votes out of more than 2 million cast.
And traditional values winning out with the voters when it came to the marriage amendment. 8 states voted on amendments to ban gay marriage, establish marriage between a man and a woman. Voters in Colorado, Idaho, South Carolina, South Dakota, Tennessee, Virginia, and Wisconsin approved a constitutional amendment banning same-sex marriages. Arizona rejected the referendum. So you take a look at some of these things, and again, you go to Wisconsin, one of the most liberal states in the country, yet they passed this ban on same-sex marriage. It's very interesting how things have broken out.
Going to be an interesting couple of years in Washington as well.
Well, the seat of former House Majority Leader Tom DeLay going to the Democrats. Nick Lampson victorious last night by a sizable margin over his opponent. Lampson taking DeLay's vacant seat last night. That's the first time a Democrat will represent the Houston district in nearly 2 decades. Kim McIntyre is live in Clear Lake, Texas.
Edie, this race is about as unusual as you can imagine. We had Tom DeLay, who reigned over this district for 22 years, who had to drop out because of legal troubles. Then you had a Republican write-in candidate that had a very unusual last name. And we have 2 elections with 2 winners for 1 congressional seat. Now, the Republican write-in candidate, Shelley Sekula Gibbs, will serve out DeLay's last 2 months in office. Sekula Gibbs won the special election, but that wasn't the big race here. She lost the full-term seat to Democrat Nick Lampson. He won by 10% of the vote and will be the first Democrat in 2 decades to serve this heavily conservative district. Lampson chose not to run in the special election. Instead, his campaign focused on taking DeLay's seat from the Republican-dominated House. Lampson says voters in the 22nd are fed up with corruption in Washington.
We want true ethics legislation that's going to change the way our Congress works, and we need to get down to business and do the will of the people.
Political experts say that Lampson's victory for the Democrats is one thing, keeping his colleagues happy will be another. In such a red-leaning district, they say Lampson will be butting heads with some of his powerful blue leaders.
He's going to have to probably defy the national leadership on some issues. He'll probably have to take a more conservative stance on something than, say, the expected Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, would take.
The Democrats put up big money for Lampson to win. They actually spent thousands of dollars sending letters to voters about the other Republican write-in candidates so they can divide and conquer. Edie.
All right. Thank you very much.
What's interesting, Edie, as the results came in last night, the race that tipped the balance of power to the Republican side was Tom DeLay's old seat. Tom DeLay, who thought he had engineered a sort of a veto-proof or a permanent Republican majority,
Right.
That seat went Democratic, and that's what gave Democrats the balance of power in Washington.
And that's what's interesting. The overall view, when you take a look at what's happened here, because that section of the state, very GOP, and they broke against the party. There was, for whatever reasons, so they break against the party. They vote for conservative Democrats. When you take a look at what Rahm Emanuel did, he brought in conservative Democrats. Now that's interesting because the leadership they will report to is the old guard, the very liberal side of that. And speaking of, let's take a look at the head of the Democratic Party, and that is Howard Dean. He is speaking at the National Press Club. This sets up something very interesting. Who will they side with?
Let's listen in for just a couple of seconds to what Howard Dean has to say.
She actually did for my predecessor, talked about values and how to connect with people that we hadn't been connecting with. I thought it was a seminal polling work, at least on the Democratic side, and he's been our pollster ever since. So, Cornell Belcher.
One thing I guess you're not going to hear from Howard Dean is any kind of a scream about states where they still hope to pull out Senate races.
But that goes, you take a look at Howard Dean, you take a look at Nancy Pelosi, what they hope to accomplish with the party. Will they get help from these new Democrats coming into Congress?
It is going to be an interesting couple of years in Washington. We'll be right back with more of your political coverage on Fox News Live.
A shift of power in the House for the first time in a long time. Democrats now in control. What exactly will their agenda be, and how might you be affected? Jim Engel is live in Washington with some answers. Good morning, Jim.
Good morning, Edie. Well, you've been talking about a lot of those issues, and there were indeed many of them in the campaign, many of them mentioned by Democrats after the fact, but Democratic leader in the House has pointed to one in particular.
Stay the course has not made our country safer, has not honored our commitment to our troops, and has not made the region more stable. We cannot continue down this catastrophic path.
Now, Democrats have repeatedly made clear there will be lots of hearings on Iraq as well as other issues, but the new direction on Iraq is not so clear. Democrats have been uniformly critical of the situation there, but deeply divided over what to do about it. Many leaders of the party say the consensus position was a small withdrawal at the end of this year, but no timelines or deadlines after that. But John Murtha, who is running for majority leader, wants complete withdrawal as soon as possible. So it isn't clear exactly what kind of mandate the Democrats have won.
Mandate for what? I mean, the Democrats don't have a definitive plan, so I don't know that anyone would argue that it's a mandate. I think the dilemma here for the voters is they see what's going on in Iraq, and there's a gut feeling, common sense feeling among the public that just things are a mess, things aren't going well, and that there needs to be a change of direction.
Now, many Democrats think the change in direction is to be more successful by changing tactics, maybe even dividing the country into 3 affiliated parts, but many remain opposed to a rapid withdrawal, saying that would be a disaster. The Democrats also have a long list of domestic goals, including an increase in the minimum wage, but many states have already taken care of that. 6 states voted last night to raise the state minimum wage above the federal level of $5.15 an hour, joining 23 other states which have already done so. Edie?
All right. Thank you, Jim. John?
Let's take you out west to Nevada now. The governor's race is over. Republican Jim Gibbons is the winner. This race took a nasty turn in its closing days with a cocktail waitress accusing Gibbons, who is a 5-term congressman, of sexual misconduct. Here's a look at the final numbers. Gibbons has 48%, his Democratic challenger, Dina Titus, 44%. And the woman Jim was talking about a moment ago, Nancy Pelosi, scheduled to hold a news conference 12 p.m. Eastern Time. Fox News will carry it live. All right, you decided, and we report Democrats will be in control of the House of Representatives when the new Congress convenes in January. Let's take a look at the lineup of leaders poised to take on new jobs. House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi almost certain to become the first woman to serve as Speaker of the House. Her caucus, of course, has to elect her first, but that's a foregone conclusion at this point. House Minority Whip Steny Hoyer, who was our guest a little bit earlier this morning, likely to become Majority Leader in the House. New York Congressman Charlie Rangel likely to head the House Ways and Means Committee. Joining us now, Leslie Marshall, radio talk show host at Westwood One Radio Network. Also with us, talk show host Mark Williams. Mark, some of these positions that we just talked about were positions that Republicans used to try to scare people. The president said, you don't want Charlie Rangel writing tax laws in this country. It didn't work. Mark, why not?
Well, not because the Democrats had a better idea. I think what we saw here was, as many people have been warning for the last couple of years, myself included, the Republicans didn't pay attention to business at home, the home base. They strayed from the values and from the issues that got them put into office. Now, that doesn't mean Republicans went out and voted for Democrats, but it means I think a lot of them stayed home or were nowhere near as enthusiastic as they could have been. You put that together with a bit of dirty pool, and you have a fundamental shift in power. But I got to tell you, it's going to be very interesting to see how Mr. Bush, who's handled international terrorism so well, handles the domestic legislative terrorism that Nancy Bin Pelosi's about to unleash with legislative versions of ethnic cleansing that will be hitting the fan beginning with the press conference.
All right, Leslie, some observers, including the Washington Post, essentially say Democrats didn't win this election. Republicans lost it. What do you say?
I say that's just typical Republican being sore loser spin. I mean, seriously, let's put our
the Washington Post, Leslie, in its editorial page is not exactly a Republican bastion.
But there are conservatives everywhere, and soon there will be liberals everywhere, as you can see. The country is changing. Let's call it what it is. This is, you know what? If this happened to Republicans, Mark, John, I would be the first to say congratulations. This is a victory, and that's what everyone should be saying to Democrats today. But not just to Democrats, to Americans that voted and Americans that said, look, we call the shots. We are your employers, Congress. Also sending a message to the president, and I do agree with Mark somewhat, that the Republicans weren't listening to Americans. I don't agree when he said the Democrats didn't present anything good. That's not true. What America clearly said is they were tired of being lied to. They were tired of the secrets. They're tired of us being in Iraq. And I do agree with Mark that it is time we care about what's going on here at home and focus on America and focus on the American agenda, because we've got a lot of problems in this great country.
Mark, as you well know, these changes in power don't happen all that often. It's been a dozen years since Republicans swept into the House in '94. Are we looking at a decade or more of Democratic rule?
No, I don't think we are at all, because we're going to see, beginning with the flurry of press conferences today, we're going to see the Democrats reveal themselves for what they are. And we're going to see that this country hasn't fundamentally shifted. I mean, you guys mentioned Wisconsin a while ago, banning same-sex marriage. You don't get any more liberal than parts of Wisconsin. America hasn't changed. As we've been warning the Republicans kind of left their base. Come back home, Republicans will put you back in office.
It's going to be great fodder for you two talk show hosts, Mark Williams, Leslie Marshall.
It's a beautiful thing.
All right, thanks very much.
For the next 10 years, Mark, for the next 10 years.
Yeah, 2 years.
Good to see you both. Talk to you soon.
Also in the news this morning, deadly flooding in Washington state, making the rescues difficult. A state of emergency in 18 counties. A live report straight ahead. And we're awaiting a live White House news conference at 1 o'clock today. The president already calling both Denny Hastert and Nancy Pelosi this morning. We'll see what he has to say to the rest of the country. Coming up on Fox, political coverage, fair and balanced.
And you find candidates that can win. If you're in the business of winning elections, you got to find the right candidates. And across the board, from Iraqi war vets to athletes to business people to police sheriffs, you find the candidates that best represent the opportunity to give voice to the democratic principles and ideals.
From America's Newsroom, I'm Lauren Green. The November death toll rises again in Iraq. The U.S. military now reporting the deaths of a Marine and a U.S. soldier, bringing to 21 the number of U.S. troops killed this month. In Baghdad, more sectarian violence. Police say a car bomb killed a civilian and wounded 6 others in northern Baghdad. And in a separate attack, a homicide car bomber attacked a convoy of Iraqi commandos, killing 1 soldier and wounding 3 others. In other attacks, 3 civilians were killed by mortar shells in central Baghdad. 13 other people were wounded. And Iraqi police say mortar rounds landed on a soccer field in the Shiite neighborhood of Sadr City, killing 7 people. In Washington, heavy rains and mudslides sending floodwaters surging through a number of towns. Emergency crews say the record rains shut down roads, making rescues more difficult. Dan Springer is live on the Tolt River near Carnation, Washington. Dan?
Yeah, Lauren, and I'm actually seeing some blue skies now. The rain has thankfully ended here in the Pacific Northwest, but still many folks in the state of Washington and Oregon are stranded by floodwaters that are still covering many roadways like the one you see behind me and homes. In Pierce County near Tacoma, a torrential downpour led to a levee breaking there, and the homes and neighborhoods quickly filled up with water. The Coast Guard and county search and rescue teams were called in to save people. The levee was eventually fixed, and the water is now receding. Yet still there are flood warnings in effect on 8 rivers, including the Cowlitz, which claimed a second life yesterday. A man drove past a road closure sign and he drove right into the river. The devastation from the storm extends all the way down into Oregon. Tillamook County was hardest hit there, with about 100 people needing rescuing from rising water. A state of emergency has been declared in 18 counties in Washington state and in several counties in Oregon. As far as how this all affected voter turnout yesterday, we're being told by election officials that turnout was very strong in Washington state, somewhere along 67% of the folks that came out to vote yesterday, but that's because a lot of people vote by mail and that wasn't affected. Yet there are still some ballots that are in police lockup not far from here because they couldn't get driven to the county elections office. Some people actually had to cast flood ballots because they couldn't get to their polling site, so the state and the counties allowed them to vote provisionally by faxing and emailing their vote. Still, these are hardy folks up here in the Pacific Northwest. A lot of rain doesn't keep them from voting. Back to you, Lauren.
All right, thank you very much, Dan Springer. In other news, in Damascus, Syria, the head of the Islamic militant group Hamas calling on Palestinians to resume attacks on Israel because of an Israeli tank shelling of a town in Gaza. And the military wing of Hamas in Gaza urges Muslims worldwide to attack U.S. targets. Israeli tanks blasted the northern Gaza town of Beit Hanun early today. At least 18 civilians were killed. Palestinian leaders are calling for international intervention to end almost 5 months of fighting. The Israeli army says it was targeting the source of Palestinian rocket fire. Finally, a very unusual accident in Gaston County, North Carolina. 2 pickup trucks collided yesterday, one hauling cattle, the other carrying a church steeple. Neither driver was seriously hurt, but traffic was snarled for a couple of hours on I-85. The cattle truck driver told police the cattle suddenly shifted to one side, causing him to lose control. And those are some of the stories Fox is following. I'm Lauren Green.
President Bush will hold a news conference at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. We'll have that for you after spending this morning making phone calls to midterm election winners, including the likely new House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. This after the Republicans did not keep control of the House. Greg Kelly is live on the North Lawn. Greg?
Hi there, Edie. The word from White House officials that the president is obviously disappointed with the results. He found out late last night from Karl Rove that the House is lost, and he woke up to a politically very, very different world. As you mentioned, the president will have that press conference this afternoon. In the meantime, he has been on the phone with Republicans and some Democrats. Nancy Pelosi, also Rahm Emanuel, perhaps the prime mover, the engineer really behind this victory for Democrats nationwide. What we are told, these conversations were cordial, and both sides really spoke about working together, bipartisanship, and there were lunches and coffees scheduled for later this week. Now, President Bush did what he could to prevent all of this from happening. He was on the stump aggressively for the past 5 or 6 days. The White House limited campaigning to where they thought he could help Republicans and not hurt them. And he went into red states, but even there, some of the candidates he personally appeared with did not fare well, like Jim Ryan in Kansas. Also, Shelley Sekula Gibbs from Texas failed to take Tom DeLay's seat. Jim Nussle, he made several appearances for him, raised a lot of money for him, tried to help him out in his gubernatorial quest in Iowa. He also came up short. On the Senate side, Friday, the president stumped all over Missouri for Jim Talent, the state's junior senator. It was not enough, and it possibly could have hurt him. At least that's what Claire McCaskill, the Democratic challenger, tried to do with that visit. Claire McCaskill McConnell, again, the victor in that race. Now, we don't know the final results in Virginia or in Montana, but it was in Montana that the president again made a personal appearance on behalf of Conrad Burns. That was last Thursday. Final results not in yet. You mentioned the press conference will be 1 o'clock this afternoon. I think there will be some tough questions for the president. Number one, what went wrong? And number two, why were you so optimistic? Because the president really did seem to believe that his party would come out on top, and he was predicting victory as recently as Monday, I believe. But again, 1 o'clock Eastern from the East Room of the White House. We'll have it live. Back to you.
All right, we'll be taking a live look at that. Meanwhile, Hillary Clinton winning a new term in the Senate. These are live pictures right now from Bohemia, New York, where she is going to thank supporters. Hillary Clinton laying down the groundwork for a possible presidential run in 2 years. Rick Leventhal is live on Long Island. Rick?
And Edie, your timing is flawless because the recently reelected junior senator from New York is now in the building. I see her greeting some of the people here inside the airport diner in Bohemia, New York on Long Island. This is the second of 7 stops that she'll be making across the state to thank voters for her overwhelming victory in last night's election, capturing 2/3 of the vote, 67% against her Republican opponent, John Spencer, even winning traditionally Republican areas. Mrs. Clinton's first stop this morning was a firehouse on 8th Avenue near Midtown, New York, where she thanked first responders. She had breakfast with them, thanked them for their dedication and hard work, and talked about improving their health benefits and improving their equipment as well. 6 years ago, you may recall, she was a recently former First Lady. She made a quick move to New York to capture a vacant Senate seat with a high-profile high-profile campaign, and promised voters that she would fulfill her full 6-year term, despite rumors she had her eye on a higher office. Well, this time around, she's made no guarantees, and there are more rumors of a presidential run. In fact, she spent almost $30 million on a race that was never really in doubt. She spent more than any other candidate in the country. And last night at her Democratic Victory Party, she made several references to New Yorkers and Americans coming together as a state and a country while taking shots at the current administration.
The Vice President said, regardless of the outcome, the administration would go full speed ahead in the same direction. Well, I think that the American people have said, not so fast.
Good morning, Senator. How are you? Good. You want to get a quick word with you, Ms.
Just 1 second.
Well, there she goes. She's now speaking to some county executives, some local Democratic Party leaders here inside the airport diner in a much anticipated visit here. She leaves the diner later this morning and flies to Binghamton, Buffalo, Syracuse, Rochester, and Albany. And by the way, we're not expecting any major announcements from Mrs. Clinton today about any presidential run. We're hearing that if there is an announcement, it could come about a month from now, Edie.
Very interesting. Well, you're watching her as she is doing what she has done very well, and that is get those local machines behind her. And you saw that certainly with the results, didn't you?
Yeah, we did. Again, capturing a whopping 2/3 of the vote, 67% here in New York, winning, like I said, traditionally Republican areas, trouncing her competition. But remember, she spent roughly 6-to-1 in dollars, almost $30 million on this race, and a lot of people believe that she spent all of that money because she was building a base, trying to show that she has widespread support so that she can make a successful run for the Democratic nomination for president.
All right. Well, she didn't have time to talk to the press right now, but it sounds like maybe a month or so from now.
Unfortunately.
She'll take some time. All right. Thanks very much, Rick.
You're welcome.
We take you back out west now, and the left gaining ground in a former GOP stronghold. A 7-term Republican congressman losing his seat, plus another key loss for the right in Arizona. William LaJeunesse is live in Los Angeles.
Well, Edie, you know, Republicans did lose the House, but President Bush may have found common ground on illegal immigration. With a more moderate House, he is more likely to get his way on illegal immigration. That is a guest worker bill that has a path to citizenship. It does not require illegals who are already here to go home. But Arizona voters definitely sent him a mixed message. They approved 3 propositions prohibiting illegal immigrants from 1, receiving bail, 2, punitive damages from civil suits, and 3, any kind of in-state college tuition or almost any form of government aid. And yet, they threw out one of the leading voices against illegal immigration, J.D. Hayworth. Hayworth is a polarizing figure. The Arizona Republic called him a bully. Hayworth had a 15-point lead until Democrats Democrats targeted his race. Instead, they elected moderate Harry Mitchell, an ex-mayor of Tempe and state lawmaker. He is, like John McCain, favoring a guest worker bill and a path to citizenship for illegals already here.
I think people are just plain wanting a new direction. I think they're tired of the way things are going in Washington, and they believe that we ought to be have some new priorities.
Now, the surprise in California, the defeat of 7-term Congressman Richard Pombo, current chairman of the House Natural Resources Committee and a vocal opponent of the current Endangered Species Act. He was targeted by environmental groups and Hollywood celebrities, and he lost to a political neophyte, Jerry McNerney. Initially, even the Democratic Party hadn't supported McNerney. Now, on ballot propositions, Californians rejected a $4 billion tax on domestic oil production, giving that money instead to alternative energy, and that was despite the support of President Clinton and Al Gore. Californians also rejected.
Oh, we lost that shot right now. We will try to rejoin him, but we're continuing to watch the races that are still being decided this morning. In the meantime, we move on. He's been criticized for his handling of the Duke University rape investigation, but that didn't seem to hurt Mike Nifong at the polls. The Durham, North Carolina DA won re-election last night, taking more than twice as many precincts as his main challenger. Nifong's opponents had been hammering the way that he's managed the investigation of those Duke lacrosse players accused of raping an exotic dancer. But in the end, not enough. Nifong will be Durham's DA for the next 4 years. A polling site showdown, Texas style. Democratic State Representative Patrick Rose got a lot more than he bargained for at the ballot box yesterday. He says he was campaigning when a former opponent, a man he beat 4 years ago, took a shot, a cheap shot. Rick Green, his challenge from 2002, accused that is of jumping out of his truck, throwing a punch, and Representative Rose is with us now. Good to have you here with us.
Good to be with you, Edie.
Well, tell us what happened. Where were you, and what unfolded?
I was down the road from your hometown, Edie, at the Sunset Canyon Baptist Church on 290, talking to voters as they were in line, waiting to vote, and didn't even see the guy come out of the car. He landed a push, but he didn't land a punch, and it was over before it really began.
Any idea why?
I think there's a lot of bad blood over the last 4 years. The good news is, and what we're excited about, I got back to work. We worked the polls till 7 o'clock, and I'm just excited to have the opportunity to be back for 2 more years to serve the families of this district. We've got to finish the turn lane, ED, there on Highway 290 out to your ranch, get that done. We've got a lot of important issues in the district. I'm excited to get back to work.
But does it strike you as unusual and perhaps an indication of how contentious politics in general has gotten when it comes down to someone throwing a punch outside the Baptist church?
I think it's way over the line. Very unfortunate that it happened. I mean, people have, and for good reason, bad feelings about politics and politicians today. This is a great example of why they do. I'm just glad that, it was over quickly. No one was hurt. I was back to work, and most exciting of all, I'm just excited to get back to work for this district these next 2 years.
All right. Well, thanks for being with us. Next time, I understand you're keeping your left up.
Going to keep the left up.
Okay. Thank you very much, Representative Patrick Rose.
Have a nice day.
You too. Coming up, we will check in on Montana. Democrat John Tester started Election Day chopping feed for his cattle, while he continues to wait on ballot counting to see if he is Montana's newest senator. Well, as you know, there are 2 Senate races that are too close to call still. In Virginia and Montana, some precincts in the absentee voter form still have to be counted and heard from, and recounts then could swing those races either way, with control of the Senate still hanging in the balance. We're talking now to the Republican National Committee's former general counsel, Mark Braden. Good morning, and thanks for being with us.
Well, I don't know if it's a good morning for many Republicans, but I'm happy to be here.
Well, let me ask you about that, because there are some who say that this could be a very good time for President Bush, especially on immigration, because many of the Democrats and the moderate Democrats that were elected yesterday have more in common with the president's immigration plan than the Republicans did.
Well, I think that may be true on the one issue of immigration, but that's, only one star in the universe. There are a lot of other issues where it's going to be a little more difficult from the White House perspective. But you're right on immigration. Some allies were elected and some opponents were defeated.
All right, let's take a look at what's happening now. We've got Virginia and Montana still hanging in the balance. In Virginia, I believe it is still within that margin where they can have the recount. The state would have to pay for it because it's less than 1/3 of 1%, I believe. What happens there? What's the timing?
Well, the Virginia process, it will be a while. It's a slow, deliberate process. First, we have to have the official canvass. Everything we have right now, of course, are unofficial numbers. The canvass is the process where the votes are actually tabulated. And it's not unusual for significant numbers of votes to change. And when I mean significant here, 100 votes here or 500 votes there. So the margin may change somewhat. Then following the canvass, if it's less than one half of 1%, there will be an automatic recount in Virginia, which is basically a retabulation, recounting process. I would be quite surprised if we had a final decision in this race much before the Thanksgiving.
Wow. All right, let's take a look at Montana. Still tabulating the votes there. Less than 2,000 votes, I believe, differentiating the two candidates. What happens there?
Well, again, it's the same process. We're still a couple days away from probably the official canvass where we'll get official numbers and we'll see how large it is. Montana has a statute. They do not have an automatic recount, but anything that's less than 1/4 of 1% and also 1/2 of 1% is a different standard. That's exactly what you say. But basically, if the candidate asks for it, the losing candidate asks for it, they'll get it. And again, with control of the Senate being in play, I see very little likelihood that a recount won't go forward in Montana, too.
Okay. Well, thanks for joining us, Mark Braden, former General Counsel to the Republican National Committee. And a look at the White House, where President Bush expected to speak to the nation about the election results. That's coming up at 1 o'clock Eastern Time. We'll have that for you live. After the break, a closer look at the message voters sent. Well, you got the chance to go to the ballot box and you were heard. You want change in Washington, but exactly what will you get? Take another look at the balance of power on Capitol Hill. Now, here is the House. Democrats will be in control there, 229 to 205 with one independent. And in the Senate, the Democrats needed 6 seats. Now, they've got 4 so far. The 2 races that we mentioned a few moments ago still up in the air. So Democrats run the House. They may wind up running the Senate. But what does all that mean for you, for America? Charles Krauthammer is a syndicated columnist and a Fox News contributor, and it's good to have you here with us.
Pleasure to be with you.
So what does this mean? Do you move forward on legislation? Do you really see any changes?
I think there'll be very little in the next 2 years. The president has lost much of his power. When you lose the House, and he's going to lose the Senate as well after the recounts are done. It's a vote of no confidence, and that's how it'll be seen. On the other hand, the Democrats do not have the huge majorities they would need to pass anything over the president's veto. You might get one piece of legislation on immigration. Other than that, nothing. What you will have is agitation by the Democrats on Iraq, but I cannot see the Democrats actually withholding money from the troops, which is their only real on-the-ground leverage, because that would be seen as undercutting our boys and girls overseas. So there'll be a lot of arguing over it, but the president still will determine Iraq policy.
You know, we had the chance to hear from Rahm Emanuel earlier today on Fox News Channel, and he is the person who really went out and picked the people to run against Republicans. And he chose people that are Democrats, but in many ways were social conservatives. Now, when those people come into Washington and are up against the like of Nancy Pelosi and Charlie Rangel and the folks who are leading their party, what will happen?
Well, if you're a freshman and you're going to sit in the back bench, you're not going to make a lot of noise.
But you've got to be reelected in 2 years.
You do, but I don't think there'll be any radical steps. For instance, on the minimum wage, every Democrat can agree on that. There's not going to be any stuff on the hot button social issues. And these Democrats, remember, do owe their election, as you say, to Rahm Emanuel, who recruited them, to Nancy Pelosi. So they will be fairly loyal. You won't begin to see defections, because after all, this is an expansion of the ideological base of the Democrats. They're becoming a bigger tent.
But the splits among them would happen way down the road a few years into this, and not in the next year or two.
Okay, let's take a look then down the road a couple of years. Right now, we get Democrats taking over the major positions in the House. But if by 2008 they have not been able to accomplish anything significant, doesn't that hurt them on the bigger political scale?
Absolutely. I mean, there are some people who might argue that if you were very cynical, you would say that this was what the Republicans needed, a kick in the pants, and also a shift of the responsibility to the Democrats. They now have to join in the governing in a very hard situation in Iraq and elsewhere, and if things don't go well, they will share in the blame. Whereas had the Republicans maintained the House and the Senate, they would be the fall guys for every calamity or misadventure between now and then. So in a sense, sharing power on the run-up to an open presidential election in 2008 is something that, ironically, I think are going to help the Republicans in the presidential election.
All right. Well, we appreciate your time this morning. Charles Krauthammer, thank you.
It's a pleasure.
Coming up right now, live look at the big board and what some could read as Wall Street's take on the election. Take a look at that right now. Dow Industrial Average just down a little under 7 points at 12,149. Plus, coming up in our program, we're going to be hearing from a lot of folks. Nancy Pelosi, I believe, will be speaking. The president is going to be talking. And Senator Allen, his campaign advisor, will be holding a news conference in about a half hour. Of course, that's one of those Senate seats that is still up in the air. You are watching Fox News Channel. Foxcast for Wednesday. All eyes, of course, on the Pacific Northwest, where we continue to see some showers today. A little bit of a reprieve, but as we go into Friday and the weekend, another 2 powerful storms are waiting in the wings. So impressive storm totals over the last couple of days. And we do have some scattered showers west of Lake Tahoe in southern Idaho, and then towards Red Lodge, Montana, into western Dakotas, where we could see some showers and even a little bit of mountain snow. Now, again, the storm totals are very impressive for places in Washington and Oregon. Over a foot of rain for Stampede Pass, over a foot for Shelton, Washington. Seattle, just over 8 inches. And as I mentioned, it's not over yet, unfortunately. Today, bit of a drier day, but as we head for Friday and Sunday, another 2 storms waiting in the wings. And the Northeast is a soaker today. Looking out our windows here on 48th and 6th, it is just pouring. The umbrellas are out. We are looking at showers and thunderstorms from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, through Philadelphia, New York City, Worcester, Massachusetts, and just around Bangor, Maine. So this wet weather going to continue throughout the afternoon and evening, a slow-moving system, but we should have a drier day tomorrow as well. We could see some scattered showers for the Carolinas and the Florida region, but so far the Sunshine State looks pretty dry. Temperatures, that's our other big story. We're going to see highs today close to 30 degrees above average in some cases. We could hit records in parts of the Midwest and the Central Plains. Right now looking at 50s for a lot of you folks. 65 in Dallas, 67 in Houston, 58 in New York. So it's kind of a muggy wet day in the Big Apple. Looking at 55 in Denver. We're going to be in the 70s today. 58 in Las Vegas and 59 in Los Angeles. Yesterday in Los Angeles, 97 degrees. I do believe that was a daytime record. Today in the 80s. And we're looking at 65 for Chicago with some sunny skies. Those rain showers moving across the mid-Atlantic and the Northeast. Could see some windy conditions as that system exits the coastline. 75 in Tampa with partly cloudy skies. Again, we could see some scattered showers across the Florida region and the Carolinas. Looking good for Texas and the Mississippi Valley. Denver, 74 today, but we could eat closer to 75, 76. Again, those showers and thunderstorms for the mountainous regions. Northern California, looking at the potential for some showers. And again, 2 more systems on the way for the Pacific Northwest. I'm Janice Dean. That's your Foxcast. Americans voting for a change of direction, giving Democrats control of the House for the first time in 12 years. Control of the Senate is still up in the air. Democrats picking up 4 of the 6 needed seats, but 2 races are still too close to call. We have Fox Live team coverage of You Decide 2006. Molly Hennenberg is in Washington. Greg Kelly is at the White House. Jeff Goldblatt is in St. Louis, Missouri. And Steve Santani is in Washington, D.C. But we start with Molly in Washington. Hi, EDS. Virginia and Montana are still too close to call. Ballot counting continues in both states today. The GOP needs to hold on to one of those states to keep control of the Senate. The Democrats need to win both seats in order to get control. Last night in the Senate, 7 key Senate races, Democrats picked up seats, seen here in blue, in Rhode Island, Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Missouri. Republicans were able to hold on to a competitive seat in Tennessee, seen here in red. And again, Virginia and Montana, highlighted in yellow, are yet to be decided. In Montana, Democrat Jon Tester is ahead of incumbent Senator Conrad Burns by about 1,700 votes. If that gap were to narrow to about 1,000 votes, it would fall within the margin of a recount there. In Missouri, it was a closely watched race between Democrat Claire McCaskill and incumbent Senator Jim Talent. When many election watchers went to bed last night, it was still a toss-up. But in the end, McCaskill pulled it out. And after the election, she told her supporters, quote, "You believed that you could make a difference, and you did. The nation was watching, and as she said, we showed them." So Democrats went into last night needing 6 more seats in the Senate. They got 4. The 2 final seats are yet to be determined. Edie? Well, what we do know so far is that there is a power shift in the House as the Democrats regain control for the first time in 12 years. And House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi says her party made history, and now it's time to make real progress. National correspondent Steve Santani is live in Washington, D.C. So how do you make that progress?
That remains to be seen, but Democrats are planning their agenda now after seizing control of the House, while Republicans are regrouping after a decisive electoral defeat. Democrats needed to win 15 seats in the House to seize control, and so far they've taken 27 seats and are expected to see an overall gain of approximately 30 seats. That means Dennis Hastert is on his way out as House Speaker, and California Congresswoman Nancy Pelosi is on her way in. She said last night Americans have voted for a new direction, especially in Iraq, where she says staying the course has not made America safer. A leading Democrat who could become the new majority leader says voters expect a nonpartisan Congress.
They voted for change, not necessarily partisan confrontation. And we're prepared to do that. And if the president wants to meet us halfway, we certainly are going to meet him halfway.
As for the Democratic agenda, Nancy Pelosi has said that some of her first priorities will be a higher minimum wage, a better prescription drug program for seniors, and an end to the federal ban on stem cell research. Republicans are studying the results from last night and trying to analyze the outcome. Here's the reaction of former House Majority Leader Tom DeLay.
I think when you forget your principles and you play not to lose, you lose. The Republicans took a real Texas whipping last night, and we need to regroup and stand on principle.
The soon-to-be Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, holds a news conference in about an hour. Fox News will carry it live. Edie, back to you.
Thank you very much. President Bush working the phones this morning, calling Dennis Hastert first, and then congratulating Speaker-in-waiting Nancy Pelosi on her new role. The White House says that it pledges to work together. Greg Kelly is live outside the White House with the latest reaction. Greg?
Hi there, Edie. Obviously, the president is disappointed. Even his supporters are calling this a vote of no confidence, really, in President Bush. You mentioned the phone calls. The likely speaker, Nancy Pelosi, also Rahm Emanuel, really the engineer behind this victory for House Democrats. He's also checked in with top Senate leaders on both sides, and some coffees and lunches are scheduled for later in the week. Of course, the president did all that he could do, really, to prevent this from happening, but in the end, his appearances in red states for certain Republicans, not enough. In fact, some of the Republicans he appeared with went down to defeat, like Mr. Ryan, Jim Ryan in Kansas, Shelley Sekula Gibbs in Texas, Jim Nussle, a gubernatorial candidate in Iowa, also came up short. And on the Senate side, we don't know how that is going to come out. Friday, the president stumped all over Missouri for what turned out to be the losing candidate, who turned out to be Jim Talent, was not able to overcome the challenger, Claire McCaskill. And also in Montana, the Republican Conrad Burns, the president appeared with him just last Thursday, and of course we don't know the results there. The president will have a press conference at 1 p.m. and what we're hearing is that There are going to be tough questions for the president, of course, what went wrong and why the level of optimism. We were with the president for the past 5 days. He was on the campaign trail, and if you listen to his speeches, it seemed like it wasn't just spin, like the president truly believed, and Karl Rove truly believed, that they were going to pull out a victory in the House and in the Senate. Didn't happen. President Bush facing some questions today, 1 o'clock Eastern. Back to you, Edie.
All right, thank you very much. And I want to mention something, and so many of you have emailed this in. You're asking, because there are 2 independents elected in the Senate, even if the Democrats pick up these 2 seats, won't the Senate still be divided? The two independents say that they will caucus with the Democrats. So that is the reason why people talk about the Democrats taking control. In the meantime, words of reassurance from the U.S. ambassador to Iraq, Zalmay Khalilzad, telling Iraqis that U.S. policy won't change despite the GOP losses in the midterm elections. Khalilzad saying that President Bush sees success in Iraq as, quote, imperative for America's national interests. And Senator Joe Lieberman is one of those independents that I was talking about. He will return to Washington for a 4th term. But of course, he's elected as an independent, although he says he'll caucus with the Democrats. Here he is. We don't have that sound for you, sorry. Mr. Lieberman beat out Ned Lamont just 3 months after the anti-war businessman toppled him in the Democratic Party. And that is why Senator Lieberman decided to run as an independent. Coming up, we're going to be watching for information from both the soon-to-be House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, we get used to saying that, and also the president. He'll be speaking at about 1 o'clock, I believe. Right now, let's go to Brian Wilson for more of an update on the latest in Washington. Brian?
I want to bring you up to date on a pretty interesting situation right now regarding this Senate race in Virginia. Now, here are a couple of ifs that are very important, Edie. Pay close attention to this. If the final determiner of who controls the Senate comes down to Virginia, and if there is a recount, we probably won't know the results of that until December. Right now, Democrat James Webb leads Republican incumbent George Allen by 1/3 of 1%. It comes down to about 7,000 votes out of more than 2 million cast. There are still some votes trickling in, and these numbers are actually just a little bit behind the curve. The Allen camp is claiming there is a math error in Stafford County that will give their side 1,500 votes. Now, those kinds of things, math errors and the like, will be cleaned up today. State law says the recount can't even begin until November 27th. But Virginia political expert Larry Sabato says traditionally recounts in Virginia usually don't result in big changes in the vote totals.
We have very precise procedures in Virginia. This is totally unlike Florida 2000. Lawyers are not allowed to go back into the individual votes. They're not allowed to make many of the challenges that were made in Florida. Frankly, the odds of 7,000 or 8,000 votes being overturned in Virginia are next to nil.
If these vote totals stay in the same neighborhood, Allen would be granted a recount without cost to his campaign if he requests one. If he requests it, it's automatic. And last night, he seemed like he was keeping his options open.
We're still counting votes. It seems like every time there's a new email, you know, there's some more votes coming in. There's absentee precincts. There are some counties that say that, well, they'll get to counting the ballots later on today. In other words, they've gone home and they'll come back to work tomorrow and count those precincts.
James Webb believes, on the other hand, that the race is pretty much all over.
We all go out, we vote, we argue, we vote. But also, we'd like to say that the votes are in and we won.
So we await the final totals in Virginia. Some numbers, we are told, will be double-checked, and then we'll wait to see if Allen wants a recount. If he does, you can be sure the lawyers are assembling in Richmond, and we are in for a very long month of November. In fact, Republican strategist Ed Gillespie will hold a press availability in about 30 minutes or so in Richmond on Allen's behalf. We'll keep you up to date on what he has to say about their plans. Edie?
All right, Brian, yeah, it sounds like it could take a long time to determine that. Well, the House of Representatives is in the hands of Democrats. Nancy Pelosi on track to become the new House Speaker. What does that mean for America? And the son of Florida Senator Bill Nelson arrested in Orlando. Why? What is he charged with? We have that for you. Israeli tanks pound a residential neighborhood in the northern Gaza Strip. We have details ahead. And we are waiting to hear from Ed Gillespie. He will be speaking about the Virginia Senate race, and we'll bring that to you live. Welcome back to You Decide 2006. I'm Edie Hill, and that is the George Allen headquarters. Of course, that is the Virginia Senate race. They're still trying to determine if they can select a winner or if this will go for a recount. And that means we probably wouldn't find out until at least, at the earliest, the end of November. We will be listening for the news conference. When that starts, we'll bring that to you right about 11:30. In the meantime, Democrats return to power, seizing control of the House and, of course, the Senate, just hanging on those two seats, Virginia and Montana. The Democrats capturing 27 Republican seats in the House. Take a look. That gives them control 12 years after they were routed by the Republicans. Meantime, battle for the Senate. The cliffhangers, votes in two states, Virginia, Montana. What does all this mean for Washington? How does it shape the agenda that people like Nancy Pelosi want to pursue? Joining us now is political analyst Hal Bruno. Thank you for being with us.
Edie, nice to be with you.
Well, we know that we do know for sure. The House is being controlled by the Democrats, and Nancy Pelosi talked about the things that she wanted to accomplish in the first 100 hours. How much of it is something she could actually do, and how much of it is just, well, it sounds really good to say it? Let's start with boosting the minimum wage.
Not in the first 100 hours, not in the first 100 days.
Fiscal discipline, pay as you go.
Yeah, well, that's a nice thought, and maybe someday it'll happen, but not soon.
All right, scrapping the ban on federal funding for embryonic stem cell research.
That one, that's a tough one that could really stir things up. Well, I don't think it's going to happen fast, though.
Okay. Something she says will happen very fast, day one, she says, and that is passing the 9/11 Commission recommendations.
I think there is sentiment for that. And I think there is a possibility for that happening. But again, it's not going to happen instantaneously. What happens here is political parties discover when they take over that they can never be as far to the left or right as their base wants them to be. Republicans are always under pressure to move further to the right, but as a practical matter, they can't. Same thing with Democrats going to the left. They've got, American politics has to be played between the two 35-yard lines in order to be successful.
Use your expertise, your background in this to explain to us what is happening, what's likely to happen. We know from the exit polling that many Republicans went in and voted for Democrats, whether it was just protesting, what has been going on with Republicans. But a lot of people say it's not because they loved the Democrats. Even Charlie Rangel saying that. More that they were just protesting. So what does that say to the leadership now?
This is one of those 12-year cycles of American politics in which a party stays in power long enough so they become fat and they become corrupt and they become incompetent. And it happened to the Democrats in '94 with the Gingrich Revolution, and they were all thrown out. And now it's happened to the Republicans. And it's brought about by a combination of factors: the war in Iraq, the inefficiency and incompetence demonstrated during Katrina. A half a dozen things contributed to this. And so this is what you would call a natural upheaval brought about by unnatural causes.
Something else happened, though, and that is that Rahm Emanuel says he went out and he found Democrats that were socially conservative on many issues. So when those socially conservative Democrats go to Washington and meet up with Nancy Pelosi and Charlie Rangel and the people who will be running the committees, what's going to happen?
Well, at the start, not much, because they're going to be backbenchers and they're going to take their place and do as they're told if they're smart. Eventually, though, yes, this force will emerge, and there already is a group known as Blue Dog Democrats that are socially conservative. Rahm Emanuel did a very smart thing. What he did was pull the Democratic Party's candidates back toward the center. Remember what I said earlier? It's a game played in the middle of the road between the 35-yard lines. Dick Scammon pointed that out years and years ago, and it's still true. And Rahm Emanuel got together a bunch of candidates that we're closely in tune with where the American people are.
Interesting. Well, we will see how all of this unfolds in Washington as they head in. Thank you very much for joining us, Hal Bruno.
Thank you.
Congresswoman Nancy Pelosi will be holding a news conference in less than an hour. We will have that when Bill Hemmer is live with us. It'll happen during his show. In the meantime, the Virginia Senate race is still too close to call. Control of Congress could ride on the outcome of that. So, does that mean bring in the lawyers, bring in the recounts? Could it take a long time to sort all this out? Also, Michael J. Fox campaigned very hard for it, and Missouri voters apparently listened, okaying an amendment to allow stem cell research on embryonic stem cell research in their state. We're live with that story. And we are waiting to hear from Ed Gillespie. You Decide 2006, and we're watching right now Rahm Emanuel. He is in Washington with a little post-election briefing with reporters.
We did that at the IE. On the national level over here, helping us on this side of the wall, was a team of strategic people we had put around Paul Begala, Stan Greenberg, James Carville, Mark Gersh, Rosa DeLauro, and Jeff Guerin, and Chris Carney, and Debbie Wasserman Schultz. That created the national strategic team here centered at the DCCC. We're over at the IE was the district by district teams that John Lapp ran. And lastly, if I could.
Well, we're listening to him talk about thanking people that you and I don't know. So I assume that's not very interesting for you. So we're going to cut away for a while. If he says something that might matter to you, we'll go back to it. In the meantime, a recount in the Virginia Senate race looking very likely. But that won't even start until November 27th. And control of Congress could ride on the outcome of that race. If Jim Webb wins, the Democrats need only one more seat to regain control of the Senate, and they may just get it because there's another undecided race, this one in Montana. For more on what's next in both of these races, let's bring in Jan Barron, former general counsel for the Bush 88 campaign and for the RNC. Thanks for rejoining us.
Hi, Edie.
All right, let's take a look at these two races. First in Virginia, where if it is within this certain number, about a third of 1 percentage point, the state automatically starts the recount, but only after the race has been certified. What does that mean?
Well, there is a process that occurs after an election, which is called canvassing, where the local election officials basically do two things. They count the so-called provisional ballots that may not have been counted on election day. And secondly, they total up the results in that jurisdiction, whether it's a county or a city, and certify the numbers that they come up with and send it to the State Board of Elections. That process in Virginia is occurring for the next week or so. Then the State Board of Elections receives all of these results from all over the Commonwealth, and on November 27th, the State Board meets and certifies, according to their tabulations, what the results of yesterday's election were in Virginia. Now, within 10 days of that November 27th certification, the apparent losing candidate has a right to ask for a recount. However, the difference in the voter outcome has to be within 1%, and if it's 1/2 of 1%, the state will pay for the recount expenses. If it's more than 1/2% but less than 1%, then the candidate who's asking for the recount has to post a bond and basically ensure that the campaign will pay for the expenses.
So that means we're waiting. Now, what about in Montana, where we have, I believe it's still less than 2,000 votes differentiating the two candidates?
Yeah, it's a similar process. They're also having a canvassing. In Montana, there are actually jurisdictions apparently that have not finished counting the ballots that were actually cast yesterday. They also have absentee ballots that they haven't counted, and also these provisional ballots. The process is the same in Montana as in the Commonwealth of Virginia, although the percentages are different. There, it's 1/4%, where the state automatically does the recount and pays for it, and if it's between 1/4% and 1/2%,
then the losing candidate's campaign has to post a bond.
Okay, let me ask you this, because I know you can explain it much better than I can, and I've gotten enough emails that I know other people must be wondering this. We have two people who say they are independents. They ran as independents, and they have been elected to the Senate. So what does that mean? They say they'll caucus with the Democrats. Explain what all this translates to.
Well, at the beginning of each Congress, all the elected officials in that Congress convene in caucuses, party caucuses. And in the Senate, let's take that as a simple example because there are 100 senators. Traditionally, the Republicans caucus on the opening of the Congress, and the Senate Democrats will have their own caucus or meeting, and they, whoever has the majority will then control that body of the Congress. It's not unusual to have independents. We've had one in the last Congress, Senator Jeffords of New Hampshire.
Right.
We had one for many years from Virginia, Senator Byrd. But they usually pick one party or the other to sit down with and be part of that caucus.
And since they have said that they will sit with the Democrats, that is why they would have the majority. Thank you very much for joining us. Jan Barron. Speaker in waiting, Nancy Pelosi, is poised to make history as the Democrats take control of the House. Pelosi is set to speak at the top of the hour, and we will bring that to you live as soon as it happens. Also, Claire McCaskill coming out of a hard-fought Missouri Senate battle by the skin of her teeth. The Democrat riding the stem cell issue to victory. We're live in Missouri. And victory celebrations may have gotten out of hand after Senator Bill